This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Lisa didn't sign up for Disney Plus. That was it.
That's the problem.
That was the final tip point.
That's the problem.
Here. It's a manic Wednesday, folks. Here's what we got. We got market recoveries. I will do a fancy chart. I just put it out on Twitter. I'll get it out on LinkedIn on the real 10-year yield showing the recovery from the Japanese angst. Kriti Gupta doing a great job on that yesterday, and Nathan and Karen covered it nicely in the last hour. We got an equity market as well. But I think we've really got to take time here within the glow of the Olympics in the NBC, Comcast, Universal this week.
Yes, that's right.
Home run
Yep.
on the Olympics, where Disney, to me, the headlines came out with no compare and contrast, no percentage changes. To me, they were almost misleading. We go up 3%, and now Paul down 1 or 2%. What's going on at Disney?
Yeah, I think the issue, a couple of headlines here. Just on the revenues and EPS, they beat estimates. That's good news. Their streaming business actually made money for the first time ever. So that's part of a big story for Disney. Bob Iger's really wanted to turn around that business.
Yeah.
But again, 70% of their operating income today comes from their theme parks. When I first started covering this company, it was 15%. Now it's 70. So this is a theme park business with some entertainment assets wrapped around it. The theme park business is a little bit weaker because they just had these crazy comparisons from the post-pandemic surge when people just were going crazy to get out and do things and go places.
Right.
Now that's getting back to more normalized levels. So a little bit of some tough comparisons.
Lisa, what's the Mateo house doing with Disney Plus?
We have canceled it.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Canceled.
See, Lisa's in charge of the whole thing in that household.
Oh,
we know.
yes.
I shut it down.
Twice like grip.
Exactly.
They tremble when they walk in the kitchen.
Exactly.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
And granted, we don't have young kids. I don't have Coco Melon and, the rest of it. But I'm looking at this, folks, as a former, let's remind everybody, Paul, particularly younger, this was a blue chip juggernaut like Boeing of America.
Yeah, I still think it is. But again, this, like most media companies, they're trying to just navigate this probably 10-year evolution from a cable television-based model to a streaming model, and we're right smack in the middle of that.
Triple leveraged all cash outperformed them. 10-year track record on Disney, 1.4% per year. We'll touch on that through the morning. We'll get some good work out of Bloomberg Intelligence as well on that. We're going to come up with Sam Stovall here in a moment on these equity markets on the rebound. Futures up 64. We're on YouTube the last 3 days. Talk about Manic Monday. Thank you out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. People go, what can we do to help get this thing going? Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. We're on Apple CarPlay. Good morning across the nation. Good morning in Minnesota. Pretty exciting. And Governor gets the trophy. Gets the nod.
Big time.
As they say, maybe the Twins, that'll help the Twins get through the AL to the AL pennant. Also on Android Auto as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios, and thank you, Interactive Brokers, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it in stocks rallying. This is after the Bank of Japan reassured the markets following that volatility that's sparked in part by its unexpected interest rate hike last week. Now that hike, it set off this 3-day tumble in Japanese shares, a surge in the yen on top of it. Let's check in with NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5%. S&P futures up more than 1%. Dow futures up about 0.8%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.02%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.93%, and that's up 4 basis points. Let's take that wider look. Look at the Nikkei up 1% right now. We'll look at the Stock 600 up about 1.5%. The DAX in Germany up more than 1%. Same for the CAC in Paris and the FTSE in London. We mentioned the yen, so let's get to it. The yen down 2% at 147.30 against the dollar. To earnings we go. CVS Health down 3%. It lowered its 2024 earnings outlook for the 3rd straight quarter. It also announced cost-cutting measures to save $2 billion over several years. Lyft falling down 11%. Bookings, outlook, missed estimates, and yes, you mentioned Disney. 3rd quarter results beat estimates. Like Paul mentioned, first ever profit in streaming, turnaround in the movie business on top of that. Their shares down about 2% right now. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa, Spartak walks up to me yesterday. He goes, let's go to lunch. He's all excited about the last 3 days. So he takes me out. He brings to McDonald's on 3rd Avenue.
Nice.
Somebody comes up and goes, why have you stopped doing Lisa's newspapers?
Ooh.
So do we have them today?
We do.
Good. Okay, we're back to normal here, folks, which means it's a good time to talk to Samuel Stovall. He has been here before as a child. He is so young. The crash of '87, it's a figment of our imagination. The steel strike of 1962. He remembers it. He lived it with his wonderful father. Sam Stovall, your summary of what we've experienced the last 3 trading days.
Well, I think we experienced, Tom, a market that was taken by the blind side. First off, with the carry trade unwinding on Wednesday, disappointing economic and employment data, and investors reassessing their opinion of whether we're headed for a recession. So we ended up with basically an 8.4% decline in the S&P 500 in a matter of days, a greater than 10% decline for the NASDAQ in a similar short period of time. But I think investors came to the realization that this was not 87 all over again. The Dow would have needed to have fallen almost 9,700 points for that to happen, and about 1,160 points on the S&P 500. So essentially, investors said, gee, maybe we overreacted. And as a result, with PEs having come down quite dramatically, maybe it's time to buy.
And Sam, it's just, a lot of folks are looking for maybe a more prolonged, pronounced pullback in this market as maybe part of a normal, healthy move higher, longer term. I'm not sure we got that. It seems like over the past couple of days, the market's just kind of snapping back here.
You're absolutely right, Paul. When I look back to World War II and I look at the top 15 first quarters, 2024 was number 11. Whenever we, of those 15, 14 of them had 2 declines in 1 calendar year, and the majority of them fell about 12.5%. We got off pretty early with the first one down 5.5%, and this second one down less than 8.5%. So I'm of the mindset that we probably haven't really reset all of the dials. However, the PE on the S&P on forward earnings is now down to a 23% premium from a 38% premium, and tech is at a 46% premium versus its prior 78% premium. So certainly things have come down pretty quickly.
Sam, talk to us about technology and the leadership of technology in this marketplace, whether it's the Magnificent Seven or maybe even a broader group. Is tech still able to lead this market higher?
Well, I think it is, because we're looking at earnings that are still expected to be very strong for tech. Looking at this second quarter period, while the market was expected to be up 8%, the market is now up 11.3% on an earnings basis. Tech is expected to be up 18.3 versus a 16% growth. So tech has seen an improvement in earnings, improvement in revenue forecasts, as well as profit margins.
Sam, what happens after an election? I mean, I get a couple theories. Yardeni wrote a brilliant note last night. Sam Stovall, Ed Yardeni's been very optimistic in a Stovall fashion about these roaring 20s. But with all your experience, exactly what happens the first Wednesday of November?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked, because that was the theme of my article in our flagship newsletter, The Outlook, this week.
See how he segued that?
I
His
saw
people
that.
called me up. They said, Sam's having a tantrum. If you don't mention the newsletter, he's not coming back on. Continue, Mr. Stovall.
The S&P gained an average of 3% in the final 2 months, with gains in all sizes, styles, and sectors, with only the NASDAQ 100 slipping in price. This is going back to 1992, which is as far back as S&P has sector-level data. However, we find that energy, financials, and industrials were leaders, while the more defensive areas were laggards. So essentially, once the uncertainty has been lifted, the market tends to move back into into a more positive mode, and we see that with the sectors, the cyclicals, as well as the percentage of sub-industries that do well.
I'm getting misty-eyed. I mean, it's just we nailed it there. Sam Stovall, thank you so much, a CFRA.
Yep.
We don't have that literature, folks, to protect the copyright of all of our guests. Go to CFRA and Samuel Stovall's desk to get that good research after the election. Futures up 65. The VIX, I'll talk about that, 22.57. Wow. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris introducing her new running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at a rally in Swing State, Pennsylvania.
A leader who will help unite our nation and move us forward. A fighter for the middle class.
And Governor Walz came out fighting against former President Donald Trump.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump.
The Harris campaign.
That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
The Harris campaign says it raised $20 million after she announced her running mate. And a new poll from NPR, PBS News, and Marist College has Harris leading Trump nationally, 51% to 48%. One other political note, Cori Bush lost a bitter primary battle, further shrinking the so-called squad of House progressives. The Missouri Democrat, an outspoken critic of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza, she lost to St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell. According to the AP, with 94% of the votes counted, Bell had 51% support, compared with about 46% for Bush. Hamas has named the alleged mastermind of the group's October 7th attack on Israel as its new political leader. He succeeds a key mediator whose assassination last week has set back ceasefire talks. Despite that, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says a deal could be near. A 5.2 magnitude earthquake struck in Kern County, California last night. It was felt as far south as Los Angeles. It was a rolling type quake that lasted for about 10 seconds. No reports so far of any damage or injuries. And around 7 and 10, Americans say in the last year, extreme heat has had an impact on their electricity bills, ranging from minor to major. Most have seen at least a minor impact on their outdoor activities, according to a new poll from the Associated Press that comes under the file of no kidding. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, right here on Bloomberg.
I was going to do a fancy chart right now. Forget that. Did you guys get like a biblical deluge last night? Was it like Noah's Ark?
Oh, it was very serious. I mean, you had motorists who were trapped. I'll have a little more on that. The Major Deegan, the Henry Hudson Parkway, Hackensack, New Jersey. Oh, boy. I think the whole town is underwater.
Is this because of hurricane season? Is this because of the new heat?
No, this is because of a volatile combination in the atmosphere. It's the time of year when you have these thunderstorms. Yeah. Tons and tons of moisture in the air and just let loose in a matter of an hour or two.
Yeah, we walked up to the beach last night and watched the storms. They were amazing over the ocean. Incredible.
Yeah.
And this isn't Debbie, the remnants of Debbie off the coast of the Carolinas right now.
This is before Debbie.
This is pre-Debbie.
As Savannah and Charleston get smacked. Okay. Well, very good. John Tucker,
I should also point out New York City using drones for the first time to alert residents as to flooding flying over.
Was this for the congestion tax?
No, this was, that'll be soon. That'll be after this. But yeah, so.
John Tucker, thank you so much. We do economics, finance, investment, international relations. In Japan, it is a major Japan recovery. We'll touch on this. Audrey Childe-Freeman, expert on this, will join us from London here later on this morning. I got a chart out on real yield, which is important for global Wall Street. We'll go over that in detail. Disney out, bit of a disappointment. Paul Sweeney with that. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures on the S&P 500, NASDAQ 100 gaining, and this is after the indexes rebounded more than 1% yesterday during this wave of dip buying. Right now, the S&P futures up about 1%. We have NASDAQ futures up nearly 1.5%. Dow futures up about 0.8%. The 2-year yield at 4.03%. That's up 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.94%, and that's up 4 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold higher, $2,397 an ounce. Brent crude, $77 a barrel. WTI crude, $74 a barrel. More economic data out today. The U.S. 30-year mortgage rates, well, they plunged last week by the most in 2 years. 6.55%,
wow,
reaching the lowest level since May of 2023. What are you at, Paul, right now? What's your level?
What's that?
Your interest rate for your home?
Oh, I'm 6%. I need some more work. I need some more work.
Okay, you need more work.
Yeah.
But that 6.55, it sparked a surge in applications for refi. So there you go. It's starting to change. More data on the way today, including a report on consumer credit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Mateo, thanks so much. The Summer Games coverage. I was like, yeah, we're doing Summer Games coverage. It's been a home run. Thank you, State Street Global Advisors. The Summer Games updates on Bloomberg. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Ian Lyngen publishes moments ago a blistering sentence, putting an emergency cut into play or even a 50 beep initial move risks the market revisiting the issue of Fed independence and credibility.
All right.
Classic Lyngen.
Yep, exactly.
It's just as simple
Thank
as
you.
that. Well,
Yep.
much more on that with lower yields. Right now, she had to recover from her Disney report at 6:58 here. Kriti Gupta joins us in London because she led our coverage yesterday on Japan. To me, Kriti, the Japan uproar is about done. Do you agree?
It feels that way simply because in the last 24 hours, you got commentary coming out of, I believe, the deputy governor of the BOJ basically saying the most dovish take in the face of a very hawkish rhetoric last week, saying that if the financial markets continue to freak out like this, they're not going to be moving rates. They need that stability. I think it's the first time in a while that we've actually heard a central bank governor factor in the markets and say, actually, the markets may dictate our policy more than the economics do.
You're a research beast. With the research that you read, do you do what I'm doing, which is I partition the Japan effect and the Fed economy effect in America? I keep them separate. I'm not blending them together. Do you agree with that, Kriti?
I'm going to push back against that only because I had read some mind-blowing research coming out of Barclays, actually, where they actually connected the two. They said that if you look at a range of the yen at, I think, 145 to 50 is coming out of Emmanuel Cao, who we also had on Bloomberg Television, basically that would be the range where it is acceptable for the rest of the markets to recover. And I thought that was an interesting kind of way to fold in the currency picture out of Japan, the carry trade globally, with what you're seeing in the equity space. Hey,
Kriti, it seems like, this sell-off we had on Monday on the heels of the jobs data was pretty short-lived. I mean, our market participants, our strategists that you're hearing from, are they surprised that the markets bounced back yesterday and then it looks like here today in the futures trading?
Not surprised at all. In fact, I think they're surprised that it hasn't bounced back more. And also that's a little bit concerning. And you actually saw this reversal in the Japanese markets that you haven't seen happen in the States. For example, a 12% drop on Monday met with a 10% gain yesterday and then another rally today. You haven't seen that show up in the rest of the markets. And it's why folks even at Goldman, for example, are saying there may still be some room to run on this correction.
Kriti Gupta, thanks so much. Futures up 67 this morning. Watching the VIX, stunning, under 23, 22.53. Technically, I need a 21 handle. I'm not there yet. We pride ourselves on a different set of guests. Brian Wieser from day one has been different. We're thrilled that he could join us this morning. Just lots going on there with Madison and Wall. Brian, how broken is Disney?
I don't think it's broken. I think that they, like a lot of media companies, have been struggling to figure out what to do and how to organize themselves for the future. I think that they had strategic clarity in October, thereabouts of 2018 when they launched Disney Plus. I think they lost a lot of strategic clarity, certainly going into the return of Bob Iger and in the subsequent periods. They're still trying to figure a lot of things out. They really had the right strategy trying to focus on global, for lack of a better word, domination in streaming, or going head-to-head with Netflix and Amazon on the streaming video offering.
That's the heart of the matter, Paul, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, the bottom line is they're going up against giants.
They're going up against giants, but they're a giant themselves. Brian, they did actually show some profitability in the streaming business here today. What do you and the rest of Wall Street think about the future of that business from a profitability perspective?
Well, I think most of Wall Street is really focused on profitability, to your point. Now, where I sit, which is Madison and Wall, we think that they really need to focusing on ongoing scale, which might mean profitability is a later thing. Because if you want to build up to compete better globally with Netflix and Amazon, I think profits is something you got to focus on later on. They've got parks to fund profits. I think if you want to build a streaming business, you have to continue to invest in content programming and distribution.
So, Brian, they've had actually a pretty good quarter from the box office, the studio. Have they gotten their mojo back there with all the Disney studio product?
Yeah, it definitely seems like it. I haven't focused on the studio results right now. I mean, obviously everyone's aware of just how well I think Inside Out and Green Deadpool done. But I think that one could say, yeah, it feels like they never really lost it. It was just a couple of bad movies.
Yeah. Brian, the music business is having an existential crisis over what copyrights are worth. Is it the same with the catalogs of the studios? Is Pinocchio or Dumbo or, something new, Mandalorian, are those copyrights maybe just simply not worth the goodwill or badwill on the balance sheet?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. When it comes to streaming services, you come for the new original content and you stay for the library. Disney has this massive and amazing still library, and no one else will likely ever have anything like that, but not for a very long time. So they need both, right? As long as they continue to have more and better programming, and Hulu, I think, has been crushing it from that front. Disney Plus arguably needs a lot more. Then there's something for people to come for initially and then stick around for. So I think you do need both. And Disney they'll be better positioned if they invest again more in programming and content for originals to support what they already have in this great library.
Can we have a moment of silence for Brian Wieser quickly here, Paul? Ask him a question on this. Brian Wieser nailed NBC in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Nailed it 5 years ago.
Exactly. So, hey, Brian, just to go down that path, I mean, I'm having fun with the Olympics. What does it mean for Comcast and NBC Universal? Is this going to be a win for them?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's probably they're better off having it than not, I guess is a better way to put it. It's a really expensive proposition, obviously, to run the Olympics. And I'm sure they'll say, they'll make a profit on the Olympics, and that's good for them. But you could also argue, well, couldn't they also invest in other programming and be just as well off profit-wise? Probably. So I don't think we want to overstate it as somehow, uniquely positive as a way to, build a business. It's definitely a way to build a business, but I don't think we want to overstate it either.
Brian, on short notice, thank you so much for the huge announcement from Disney, spiking up early, coming back in south right now by a number of percent. Futures up 67. We're in a recovery mode. The VIX, I don't know, 60-something on my sabbatical.
Yeah, I mean,
and then
you take a rare day off and VIX goes crazy. We're coming back into a little bit more.
Well, we had a Lehman VIX yesterday morning, a 30-something.
Yep.
And now we're at 22.49. I'm going to go over some technicals here later about what I need. I need 21 on the VIX, and then I don't know, there's another level after that. But the answer is we're getting there with futures up 66, Dow futures up 351, NASDAQ advances 1.5%. Bitcoin rally.
Oh, boy.
55,000 to 57,000 off the bottom.
Yep.
I guess that's all we can say on that. The real yield's what I'm looking at, 1.81% is a huge deal in the real yield. I want to go over a chart on that for Global Wall Street here. We can do that. We're out on Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. We're building it every day. From New York City, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In
the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen. NASDAQ futures leading the charge up nearly 1.5%. S&P futures up more than 1%. Dow futures up 0.8%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.01%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.93%. That's up 3 basis points. Stocks in Japan up more than 1%. Bank of Japan officials pledged to refrain from hiking interest rates when the markets are unstable. We head over to currencies. We have Japanese yen down nearly 2%, 147.27 against the dollar. Shares of Shopify higher, up 17%. Second quarter revenue beat estimates. Then on the flip side, you have shares of Airbnb. They're taking a hit, down 14%. The company gave that disappointing outlook for the third quarter in a row. It's warning that there's slowing demand for U.S. vacationers. And Super Microcomputer, that's lower too. It's down about 13%. Reported quarterly revenue and profit that missed estimates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. This is joy. And for all of you across this nation, around the world, and you're putting up with the micro blather of Bloomberg Surveillance on economics, finance, investment, inside baseball on Japan and all that, what it's about is not losing money. The king of not losing money is here. His name is Steve Auth, with decades of experience. He and I, do you remember the crash of '87?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember how we felt like Christmas-ish after the crash of '87? It was like, well, that was harsh. It's all over.
Yeah, it came and went very quickly.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
With what we observed Monday, was that a modern flash crash, or was that an '87 like pullback?
To me, usually these things are correlated. '87 was very unique, but this time the fundamentals are set up in a way. To me, this yen carry trade's not over, the unwinding of it. And it's often the case, Tom, when the VIX hits levels like that, you retest. You know, it takes time to unwind these things. Yeah, and that trade is unwinding. The yen's going to at least 140.
But if I've got a 3-year hold minimum, adult money, folks, we're not talking speculation now, Lisa's kids with their laptop on the couch. If I got a 3-year short-term perspective, I get that retest of the VIX soon.
Yeah. And you buy into that. I mean, we're already overweight stocks. We did cut back. We cut our overweight.
Stop. You know, what were you doing at 9:40 a.m. on Monday? Are you screaming at the Young Turks at Federated, get out the tickets? You know, Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns, get out the buy ticket and buy Apple.
I was screaming at my stock pickers to be looking for individual names, because in volatility like that, and you get a macro event, individual sales come right in front of you. So that's what we do in situations like that, Tom. We didn't add capital into equities, but across the portfolios, we were certainly looking for opportunities within them to upgrade portfolios. We're already where we wanted to be. We took a big hunk of money out of growth stocks 3 weeks ago. We parked it into your favorite asset, cash. And it's,
you know, Federated's lawyers called me.
Crowding out Tom Keene out of the cash trade.
Yeah.
Steve, I mean, a lot of folks are saying, I mean, you've been in this game a long time. A bull market needs a 5, 10, 15, 20% pullback as part of the healthy longer-term upward trend. Maybe we got something in April. I don't know. I thought maybe we were going to get something here starting Monday. But these markets have just kind of come back. Does that surprise you at all?
No, it doesn't surprise me that they bounce back. We were deeply oversold. So short term, you're going to see a bounce back. But I think we're in a point here where there's a transition occurring in the economy. We're coming into a softer period. The labor market's softening. The Fed is now looking at probably 200 basis points of cuts over the next couple of years. And that's going to help the stocks that have really been dead, left for dead in across the market. The value stocks, the small cap growth stocks, the small cap value stocks, emerging markets, all these areas need lower rates, and they're going to get them. And the only game in town was the growth stocks. They became a momentum trade, a kind of passive momentum trade because people are using ETFs for them, but a momentum trade largely funded, I think, in places like the Japanese yen. And we've just begun to unwind that trade. So we think it's early to jump back in there, but we are, doubling down on the idea that the relative growth deficit, if you will, of the rest of the market is closing rapidly. The back half of this year and next year, well, by next year, the small cap stocks are going to be outgrowing the Magnificent Seven. So, that really helps them in the back half of the year.
I started my career at Payne Weber, 1986, covering the railroad and trucking stocks. So I got to ask you about Knight Swift Transportation Trucking, Tom.
Yeah.
He's got a trucking stock on his list.
Yeah.
Steve, talk to us about Knight Swift Transportation.
Yeah, it's an example of a large cap value stock that's been left for dead. It has been treading water for 3 years now. Trucking's been in a kind of post-COVID, let's call it recession. These are the kind of names we want to own now. People are talking about recession. We've always said it's a rocky landing, it's a rotating recession. These are companies that have been in one for the last 3 years. Finally, supply and demand is evening up in trucking. And, this East Coast strike, by the way, if it comes, is only going to help the long-haul truckers because that's going to bring more freight back through California, which is long-haul. So, we think supply and demand is coming into balance. The lower rates really help a company like Knight Swift. It's trading at 8 times cash flow. Got a nice,
8 times cash flow?
Yeah, EV/EBITDA.
How quaint.
Yeah.
How quaint.
Yeah, quaint.
I haven't heard that number in ages.
Yeah, we care about cash flow.
So, again, what do you think? Do you think this Federal Reserve is going to cut? Do you think they're going to cut aggressively to begin with? Or is this going to be something that can kind of be spaced out over the remaining into 25?
God bless Jake Powell. But, you guys know we were screaming back in 21 that he's behind the curve. He's got to start hiking. When you have a Fed that is really backward looking like this Fed is, they were way too late in hiking. And that led to this, very aggressive hiking cycle that threw us into what we called a rocky landing, a kind of rotating recession. And now he's too late on cutting. And we've got real rates that are way too high. So, he's now going to have to do 50 in September. That's almost a certainty.
On a CFA basis, like Mag 7's down 15% from the peak. Bloomberg has a blended index of that. How do you think through the opportunity? John Templeton would say their shares are on sale today. So then how do you work through the marginal purchase of whichever Mag 7 right now?
Yeah, I don't think the sales are on sale of the Mag 7, Tom. They're certainly down 15%, but they were up, 60. And they've really outperformed the market. So there's way too much money still in that trade, in my view. We think within the Mag 7, there's some opportunities for stock picking for sure. But right. I don't like the fact that, when we cut large cap growth 3 weeks ago, and we've been hanging on to our positions there for a while, but when the Uber drivers are telling me the beautiful thing about NVIDIA is it only goes up and it doesn't actually go down because there's so many buyers, you have to be there. Mm-hmm. And the thing is trading at 40 times earnings. Okay, now you could say it's high 30s, but it's not there yet. And, is it a razor blade business? I'm not so sure.
Okay, I got one final question. Sebastian Page was in from T. Rowe Price. It's an upstart firm over in Baltimore.
Yeah, I heard about it.
They've got branding all across the Baltimore Orioles dugout. Why in God's name do I need to fly to Pittsburgh to explain to Venerable Federated that the Pirates need dugout support and branding from Federated?
Well, I'm going to take you out there, Tom. And you sit in center field, and as you look out at center field, do you know what you see? You see the Federated Hermes building.
I know, it's gorgeous.
It's free advertising. Free advertising. We love that kind of thing.
You've got a brand that, come on, the Pirates are, it's the best ballpark in baseball. Yeah. It's a gorgeosity team. They got some pitcher who's a phenom. I just see Federated branding like these upstarts in Baltimore.
There's a signal people use of when a company brands itself on a sports team. It's usually a sell signal.
Yeah. Well, we'll take it as a buy signal. Paul Skeens and the Pittsburgh Pirates getting it done. Steve Auth as well with Federated with some wisdom there, particularly for those with a 201k damaged as mine is this morning. Steve Auth, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Futures up 61, Dow futures up 331. The VIX 22.80. To me, that's critical on this Wednesday. I'll talk about a 21 handle. We're not there yet. but we'll do that chart here as we can. The 10-year real yield, 1.80%. Therapeutic, bouncing up nicely. A little bit of dollar strength. That key yen, not 150, weaker yen, 147.18. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Tom, Kamala Harris has introduced her new running mate. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz at a rally in Philadelphia.
Since the day that I announced my candidacy, I set out to find a partner who can help build this brighter future.
And Vice President Harris calling Governor Walz a fighter for the middle class. He came out fighting against former President Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends.
Tim Walz and Kamala Harris face a whirlwind campaign blitz this week. They're holding rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan today. The Harris campaign says United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain will join them today in Detroit. A new NPR PBS Marist poll has Harris ahead of Trump by 3 percentage points among registered voters nationally. Congresswoman Cori Bush losing a bitter primary battle driven by Democratic divisions over Israel, and that further shrinks the so-called squad of House progressives. An outspoken critic of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza, the Missouri Democrat was defeated by the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell. Bell benefited from $9.5 million in ad spending from pro-Israel groups. With 94% of the votes counted, Bell had 51% support compared with about 46% for Bush. Boeing is redesigning the fuselage component that blew out of a nearly new 737 MAX aircraft in January as the plane maker seeks to draw lessons from the accident that has thrown it into chaos. The company revealing the plan during a day-long hearing with the National Transportation Safety Board, and declaring that there should never be a government label on ammunition used in a mass shooting. Congressional Democrats plan to introduce legislation today that would forbid the Pentagon from allowing bullets made at an Army-owned munition plant to be sold to civilians. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. This is what I used to do ages ago, Paul. I do fancy charts in the Bloomberg, and you can do this this is why people have a Bloomberg terminal. The real yield, the 10-year inflation-adjusted yield, it's elegant, Paul. It's a lower yield. The Fed's going to cut interest rates. The economy's slowing.
Yep.
July 31, it plunges from a 192 down to 1.80 because of the gloom of the jobs report, and then Japan.
Yep.
And the headline here on a Wednesday, folks, is we've made back like 95% of the Japan. I don't know, Steve Auth clearly thinks we're going to retest.
Right.
But the answer is we're at 1.80 before Japan with the jobs report, and we're back just slightly above that this morning.
Yeah.
I put that chart out on Twitter.
Oh, good. All right, very good. Yeah,
So,
the real
you know,
yield.
right.
And just looking at the notional yield there, Tom, the 10-year Treasury, we're up a little bit here, up about 4.5 basis points, 3.93%. Still, below 4%. I mean, that was a solid floor for a long time. Blew past that.
Can I suggest a housing frenzy if we get a 5.99?
Oh, yeah. I think you're right, Tom.
30-year mortgage?
I think a lot of people
Frenzy.
absolutely. People looking to move and, maybe if getting out of your 3 or 4% mortgage into a 5% mortgage is not the worst thing.
Lisa Mateo having one measure of that. It's 6.55% here earlier. Again, a second day of a lift to the market. Futures up 61. NASDAQ healing levels. 5,327 SPX, 39,500 on the Dow, almost back to 40,000. Wow. NASDAQ, 18,400. From New York City on this Wednesday, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing. We have NASDAQ futures up more than 1%. Same for S&P futures. Dow futures up about 0.8%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.00%. That's up 3 basis points. And the 10-year yield at 3.93%. That's up about 3 basis points. Commodities, we have spot gold higher, $2,395 an ounce. Brent crude, $77 a barrel. We have WTI crude, $74 a barrel. Shares of Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk, they are falling. ADR's down more than 4%. This is after reporting disappointing sales of its weight loss treatment, Wegovy. I guess the competition is growing in that field. Then you have Honda reported a nearly 9% rise in profit thanks to healthy demand for its motorcycles, for its cars, but shares though down about 1%. And sportswear maker Puma taking a hit, down 14% in Germany, had an earnings miss. That's the reason for that. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate that. Paul, the gyrations we've seen in the recovery.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this earlier. I don't conflate them all together. OMG, we're all going to die. I look at them as separate things. And I really want to take issue with, we need an emergency rate cut.
Yeah.
Because that's not the heritage of the institution.
No, you're not.
Back to 1951, 52.
But I tell you, Monday morning, Tom, there was, early Monday morning pre-market, there was a sense of panic in the market. You looked at the futures, you looked at what's happening in the bond market, and what had happened in Japan with the Hang Seng Index.
Did Matt Miller find his code to sell his Bitcoin?
I don't think so. I think it's still firmly locked up.
We will see. Bitcoin up 2,000 today.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
And by public acclaim, your daily look at the front pages of Lisa Mateo Hour, brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access Interactive Brokers' vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities, no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Lisa, way too long. What do you got?
You missed it, didn't you? I know. Okay. Have you been to the movies lately?
No.
This is the problem. See, that's the problem, okay? A lot of people not going to the movies, so theaters are offering different perks. They're trying different things. There have been some summer hits. Deadpool, Wolverine, I'll probably see it this weekend. Inside Out 2, Despicable Me 4, those were big things this summer. But ticket sales still lagging behind last year. I mean, the summer is the big part for theaters. It's 40% of their domestic ticket sales. Fewer wider releases. A lot of people watching from home too. They're going to streaming. They're more comfortable at home. So what theaters are doing, they're offering perks like special popcorn buckets is one thing. In-theater playgrounds. You'll like this one. Cocktail bars.
Nice.
Inside the theaters. Okay. Order ahead concessions. I know my family loves this. You do it online on your app, and then you get there. You don't have to wait in the line.
Really?
But the popcorn's just waiting for
All
you.
right.
So those are some of the things they're doing. A lot of them like the IMAX better. I know
That
we
is cool.
prefer that.
Yeah.
we
But you
like
pay for that.
But you pay extra for
That's
it.
right.
Yes. So they're kind of banking on that too. So a lot of changes going on in the
I
movie
have
theaters.
to admit, and Afterthought is glued to the computer watching movies. She watched Chicago the other night. I'm trying to get her to watch Lost in Translation. It's not the same. The home laptop, our kids are being cheated, is the way I'd look at it.
Yeah, they're used to even watching it on their phone.
Well, I remember. I mean, my
parents.
parents will tell me they would go to the movies theaters 2 or 3 times a week.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was it.
25 cents.
That was it.
Yeah.
And then and they had all the movie shorts and all this.
Yeah.
So that experience is different from what we grew up with, which I still think was a good theater experience. Now to today, the kids, you say with technology.
My father aged. Lawrence of Arabia was $2.75. He got old. Next, what do you got?
Taylor Swift fans are celebrating Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz. Okay, there's some reasoning behind this.
Is he a Swiftie?
He is a Swiftie. Okay,
He doesn't look like a
They're
Swiftie.
calling him the Swiftie VP.
Wow.
A couple things he's done. Remember back in November 22, right after that Ticketmaster disaster with the Swift tickets. So he posted a picture of his cat on X and said that it was online all day and now it's not getting Taylor Swift tickets. Then he he went further. He signed the so-called Taylor Swift bill that was in Minnesota into law. It kind of guarantees that protection for people buying tickets online.
Okay.
And then he proclaimed 2 Taylor Swift days in Minnesota of June because the tour came to Minneapolis. So
wow.
he claimed those days. And a lot of Swift fans are jumping on. They're making friendship bracelets with his name on it. So it's attracting that younger generation.
I'm not wearing a friendship bracelet, but I do know it is a thing.
It's
a big
huge
thing. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe he's getting the Swiftie vote. That's got to help on the margin.
Need that younger,
sure.
They're looking for that
I
younger
feel
vote.
deprived because I don't have friendship. Maybe
don't?
it's because I have no friends.
Yeah, that could be it.
That could be it.
I'll make you one.
Next.
Olympics fever, right? That's all we're talking about.
Yes.
Olympics.
I love the pole vault last night.
See? That just amazes me, that sport in itself. Did you know they have breakdancing too, by the way? That's another story.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, it fades out after 3 years. You have this whole hype and then it fades out. So Netflix wants to change that. They're partnering with the International Olympic Committee. They're filming documentaries right now about running.
Oh, no, they're doing
gymnastics.
the auto racing thing?
It's the same people, the Box to Box Films, that did the auto racing thing.
Okay.
So they're there, that production company, and they're filming all those different sports. And what they're going to do is they're going to take that footage and they're going to put it into different seasons. They have the Netflix documentary Sprint, so they're doing another season of that, in the off season when the Olympics aren't running.
Right.
They're doing another season of Simone Biles Rising because that was a hit on Netflix. So they're figuring, let's film again now and then we'll, air it later. So that will, help keep the interest. But they want to attract younger fans too.
And correct me, it's in Los Angeles next?
Yes, correct.
Is that correct?
No, you're correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
That'll be big.
It's going to, it's dazzling. In fact, Mayor Hidalgo out today just screaming the politics of France has just been pushed aside by the joy of this. Full disclosure, a Greifeld sighting at the Rockstar seats. I don't know. She knows Celine.
I think
she's like best buds with Celine.
Yep.
A Greifeld sighting. She is in Paris. David Gura is our intermediary here, and we believe we may have a scheduled Greifeld conversation.
No kidding.
Catherine Greifeld, surveillance, Paris reporter. We're looking for that Friday. We're working on it right now.
Without Gus the horse, right?
Without Gus the horse.
Yeah.
Speaking of Paris, this kind of brings me into the next one. We had open water swimmers have done it. They have dived into the Seine River. Paris organizers, they said it was safe. They had a 2-hour training session. They came out. Everything was fine. But, the women, they kick off that 10-kilometer race starting one day. So tomorrow, the men's is Friday.
If the water tests correctly.
So, correct. But they say the weather's going to be great for it, so they shouldn't have any problems with the water and the bacteria levels. But a lot of swimmers are telling the Associated Press, you know what? We're still kind of worried. We don't want to get sick.
Well, I believe a Belgian swimmer was sick, but again, they're not sure if it's the river.
If it was the
or
water. Correct.
Well, I saw it's going to be pretty cool if they do it because the scenery around that thing going through the Capitol is pretty awesome.
I got the Vilebrequin swimsuit. I got the fancy, overpriced French swimsuit.
Nice.
And I got floaties that Air France gave me. I got them. But would you, Paul?
No.
I just.
I don't think so.
If they have to do it, you got to test out the current, right? Because there's a stronger current.
It's a real current.
Right.
I would guess as an amateur, it's not like the Thames. The London current is, you stand on London Bridge after the third martini, and the water's going underneath you. It's like, whoa.
Yep.
Anyways.
All right, good stuff. So we'll see how it goes.
So they did it. So
I'll
we'll
watch.
see. There is a backup plan in place in case they do not test it right.
Plan?
The backup plan is that it's a stadium that was the site of the rowing and the canoeing events. So that's there, on the ready, just in case the levels don't work out very well.
Okay. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Our newspapers this morning. Something happened here. Something beneath the radar. The Aerosmith is like stepping aside. They're just, they're just finally saying enough.
Is that right?
Yeah, they got vocal problems, and it's like 1970. It's like we're talking 54 years.
Awesome band.
And it's all you can say.
Musicians.
Going back to what the Yardbirds did a few years earlier, Aerosmith. It's an all Aerosmith Wednesday. Stay with us.
Kept rolling all night long. Train kept rolling.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr on assignment. John Tucker doing a great job filling in for Mr. Barr. Lisa Mateo with us after the newspaper report. Does she leave now?
No, I think
she stays around?
Yeah,
okay, after the newspaper report. Good to know. We're in recovering markets here on a Wednesday. Futures up 53 and critically the VIX 23.18, doing much better than 65 or 32, 25 or 624, 23.20 on the VIX right now. Disney, Paul, you looked at Disney for an hour. I can't get over what you told me. The company's 70% Disney World?
Yeah, a theme park business. That's kind of the real part. And that's where they're putting their capital, Tom. They're going to invest a ton of capital over the next 10 years. They doubled their CapEx for their theme parks because they generate a good return off of that investment.
We're gonna have to see on that as well. Got a literally lovely hour. We're gonna do again what we did last hour with Steve Auth. Darrell Cronk's gonna join us in a moment here to really give perspective on what the quiet do, given the panic that we saw early Monday morning. We're on YouTube. The best thing you can do, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. That is the single best idea I can give you. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. All of our product, including Tim and Carol in the afternoon and what they're doing with afternoon earnings as well. On Android Auto, on Apple CarPlay as well. Them coming out with new software here in the autumn to spruce up those ideas as well. Let's see what we've got now. Futures up 52. From the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. Stocks rallying after the Bank of Japan reassured the markets following volatility from that unexpected interest rate hike last week. Now we get to futures. You see NASDAQ futures up more than 1%. S&P futures, same there. Dow futures up about 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.99%. That's up 2 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 3.93%, and that's up 3 basis points. Take a little wider look. We have the Nikkei up more than 1%. We have the Stock 600 up more than 1%. Same for the DAX in Germany, CAC in Paris, and the FTSE in London. We go to currencies. A Japanese yen down about 1.5% at 146.95 against the dollar. To earnings we go. CVS Health down about 0.2%. The company lowered 2024 earnings outlook for the third straight quarter. It also announced its cost-cutting measure to save $2 billion over several years. Shares of Lyft, well, they're not getting a lift. They're falling. They're down 14% bookings, and its outlook missed estimates. Uber, you wanted to check with that, up about 0.3%. And shares of Disney, they've been back and forth. It was up 1%, then it was down, and right now, it's unchanged. It's little change. Third quarter results beat estimates, including first ever profit in streaming. They also had a turnaround in the movie business. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Just quickly here on Lyft. Can I just state, I don't get it. I just don't get the whole business proposition.
Well,
Or Uber. I mean, every driver I talk to, some of them will know me, blah, blah, blah. Every driver I talk to tells me they made less money last year than the year before.
Yeah.
Every single driver.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the courts have ruled that these are gig workers. They're not employees. They're contractors, and for most of these people, it's a second job. I can't imagine trying to really earn a complete living by being a Lyft or an Uber driver.
We'll have much more on that through the day here on Bloomberg Radio. Paul and I agreed strongly that you can do inside baseball on, say, yen dynamics or rate dynamics, but right now there's an important need to speak people. 3, 2, 1. Speak to people with perspective. Identified Darrell Cronk, CIO for Wealth Investment Management for all of the Wells Fargo platform. Darrell, were you buying shares Monday morning?
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Paul. Yeah, actually, we were buying some shares. We moved quite a bit of things around in the portfolios, both on the fixed income and the equity side. A little bit to your point, when I wake up early in the morning, like both of you do for your show, the very first two things I look at are the yen and the 2-year Treasury, right? Because to me, the 2-year Treasury is the only Fed speaker that matters right now with what's happening in the yield curve and movement. And of course, ironically, even before this past week with the yen's movement, I've had my eyes on the yen through the entire summer, because if you recall, we were worried weeks ago and a few months ago about the Ministry of Finance stepping in and defending the weakness in the yen at 160, 161, 162. So there was concerns that could break the wrong way. It actually went the other way, and on the unwind of the carry trade strengthened materially in about 4 short days after the BOJ meeting, midpoint of last week.
So, Darrell, I mean, how do we put Monday into context here? I mean, a lot of folks were saying, boy, that was a serious sell-off with real volume, real conviction, but then markets come back to a certain degree yesterday. The futures look positive again today. How do you put the last 3 days of trading into context?
Yeah, it's a good point, Paul. So I would say the recent moves, have been much more about forced unwinds and some breaching of technical support levels than any real major shift in sentiment. Right. And we haven't seen it, we haven't seen that shift in sentiment in institutional flows. We haven't seen it in retail flows. The average investor, was not Thursday, Friday, Monday running for the exits. It was a lot of forced unwinds. And it wasn't just the carry trade. Remember, we had huge crowded trades around technology. We had momentum had been the single largest factor from a factor management standpoint for years. So there was a lot of crowded money in limited spaces. Throw leverage on top of that, you get a couple things that trigger, and it just forces those unwinds.
What's new here, Darrell? In this, you came out of Ames, Iowa, with some real ability. It's a wonderful school there. I think Darrell was a wrestler for him.
Really?
He was a wrestler. I walked into the arena once. We were playing hockey. I walked into the arena, and there were like 18,000 people watching wrestling. I was like, "Welcome to Iowa."
Exactly.
And then you go to Zvi Bodie over at Boston University. I'm going to posit, Darrell, that the madness that we've seen here, or the flash crash a number of years ago, is all about modern technology, speed of news, speed of information. How do our conservative listeners and viewers adjust to the new speed of information?
Yeah, it's a great point. And you're exactly right, Tom. It is about the speed of not just the information, but the movement, right? And when these corrections happen, history tells you go all the way back to the 1930s that you get, about 5% corrections from highs in a year and 10% correction. We haven't had one since the fall of 2023 on a 10% correction. What typically happens with these things is there's a bang, right? Something happens that creates a catalyst that creates intensive selling. And I heard you guys talking about the VIX earlier. For the record, nothing good happens above a VIX of 35 ever, right? Once the VIX crosses over 35, you're in dangerous territory and things get ugly very quickly. But once that bang's done, you typically, once you have a correction, it's not a V back up most times, even though yesterday and today we're getting a little bit of bounce back. We're only reclaiming about 2.5% of the 6% we lost. Now you got to go into consolidation phase. You got to build a base. It's kind of a whimper and a sideways movement for a while before you can really make that next durable move higher.
Darrell, thank you so much. Got to leave it there. Way too short a visit thing. Let's get you in. When you're in New York, Darrell, let's get you in the studio for a solid half hour. Darrell Cronk, driving investment at Wells Fargo as well. Futures up 54, the VIX 23.25. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul. Kamala Harris in a running mate. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz hit the campaign trail in Philadelphia with the vice president going after her opponent's reputation.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Tim Walz made his campaign trail debut, citing some of the areas where he feels Donald Trump fell short.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis.
The Harris campaign says it raised $20 million after she announced her running mate. And a new poll from NPR, PBS News, and Marist College has Harris leading Trump nationally 51% to 48%. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri, a prominent member of the progressive so-called squad, was defeated in her Democratic primary by local prosecutor Wesley Bell. This according to the AP. Bush, the second member of the squad to lose a primary this cycle after Representative Jamal Bellman was defeated in June. The NTSB holding an investigative hearing on the January 5th mid-air blowout aboard an Alaska Airlines flight. 20 hours of testimony continue as the NTSB sifts through evidence to answer questions. Let's get more from Washington and Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
7 months after an almost new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft lost that large fuselage panel during flight, safety investigators are conducting an extensive 2-day-long hearing to uncover any remaining mysteries surrounding that incident. Executives from Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems continue to face questions all day today from the NTSB. Yesterday, witnesses for Boeing and Spirit defended their company's safety systems and inspection practices. The NTSB says it has not yet determined who failed to securely fasten that panel. The hearings will last for a total of 20 hours, yesterday and today. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Israel's Olympic team said some athletes have received threats as they compete in Paris amid larger tensions over Palestinian deaths during the war in Gaza and the threat of a wider regional conflict in the Middle East. Half a century ago, a French high-wire artist made Manhattan gasp.
I am holding the balancing pole in a South Tower ready to walk.
It was 50 years ago today that Philippe Petit ventured 1,300 feet to the top of the Twin Towers, took strolls on a wire fastened between them. This week, in celebration of the anniversary, the now 74-year-old will be performing at a church here in New York. He'll be crossing on a wire only 20 feet above the ground, and we'll be reliving many of the moments from that day.
Just thinking back to that. Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It wasn't occupied yet, but
have any of you ever done this thing with a pole where it's weighted and the physics is like...
Oh, I've done it.
Why am I shocked?
Of course, Lisa's done it.
Was it last Friday or the Friday before? What's it like,
Day.
Lisa Mateo, holding the pole?
It's very heavy, but that is what keeps you kind of steady as you go along. I mean, and then the person... This is a little crazy, but the person below me was actually on the wire. I was actually on a chair on his shoulders holding the pole.
Where was this again?
All on live TV. I know, it's crazy.
All on live. We can
Oh,
Google
when
this.
she was the WPIX reporter back in the day.
Yeah, they said, here's
this.
your assignment for today. Walk on the wire, stand,
How
put
far
a
off
chair
the
on and I'm still here.
Yes, she is. Oh, yeah.
It's a little scary, but that
Tom, we
pole
gotta go back
is what
and check
really
this
keeps
out.
you. I'm telling you.
Is there proof of this?
I'm going to YouTube right now.
Don't YouTube.
Eric, one of the interns to look through this and let's find the evidence. Good morning to all of you. Is it WPIX, right?
Channel 11.
Years ago. Paul, NVIDIA. I
Yep.
mean, folks, let's like lost in translation here. Lisa, John, and I at the end of the month are seeing how we can stretch Hamburger Helper.
Yep.
Sweeney's living large because he bought NVIDIA at 40 up to 135. Did you get out at 135 or have you enjoyed a 35%
I'm
pullback?
probably like most people, Tom. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what AI is and how we use it. But one thing I do understand is they're going to need the chips. I mean, all this CapEx spending we're seeing from all these big companies, they're going to need the chips. I don't know what they're going to use the chips for, but they're going to need chips. So that leads you to NVIDIA, AMD, companies like that, not Intel, for example.
There's no technical validity here except Auth and Cronk have said, step aside.
Yeah.
All my radar's up. I don't know what to do.
I don't know. I mean, it's up. It's starting trying to retrace some of those losses, but we'll see. It's off 23% from its high.
Yeah, that leveraged NVIDIA fund, that worked out. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures on the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100 gaining. This is after the indexes. They rebounded more than 1% yesterday during a wave of dip buying. So right now, checking in with S&P futures, up more than 1%. NASDAQ futures up more than 1% as well. We have Dow futures up about 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.00%. That's up 2 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year at 3.93%. And that's up 3 basis points. Commodities markets, we have spot gold higher, 2,402 an ounce. We have Brent crude $78 a barrel. WTI crude $74 a barrel. More economic data out today. U.S. 30-year mortgage rates, they fell last week, the most in 2 years, 6.55%. That was the lowest level since May of 2023. Also sparked a surge in applications for refis. More data on the way today. We have a report on consumer credit later this afternoon. I want to take a look at travel. You have Hilton. Second quarter earnings beat expectations. Higher room count that actually offset that weak demand, but shares down about 1%. And then you have online travel agency TripAdvisor down 14%. Second quarter revenue missed estimates. And finally, Airbnb down 13%. Disappointing outlook for the third quarter in a row. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, Paul, Airbnb, ever done that?
I haven't done it on my own, no. But my kids do it, and they love it, and they swear by it. You do it?
I do it. I do Airbnb. I like them.
Well, we do it. We do Verbo for the men, the guys' ski trip when we go out west. We'll just like get a condo. So it's fun.
My insurance guy said it's too much liability for me. I don't really understand it.
Yeah, you could do the Upper East Side pad. That would be awesome.
I know. Vet Bill and
Tom
Keene, they
Keene?
do.
Rent out the place.
They do
the Tom Keene place. Yeah. Premium.
There you go.
Let's see. I've been anticipating this. This is, well, first of all, the Summer Games in Paris, in Audrey Childe-Freeman's Paris. The Summer Game, the updates are brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. Huge success. It's a 3-hour conversation with the most important FX person on the planet. Audrey Childe-Freeman joins us now with Bloomberg Intelligence London. I just got to digress here, Audrey. Time is precious. Your thoughts on the success of France delivering the best Olympics ever. What's it like?
It feels good. It's not finished yet, but so far, certainly the feedback has been amazing. And what we hear from Paris is the atmosphere is excellent. And so it's a big success after early uncertainties.
Under the headlines, and folks, I can't say enough how Audrey dives deeper. Audrey, I'm looking at the Japanese 10-year real yield. And basically the experiment they've done for the last 3, 4, 5 years has a long way to go. Do you agree that we're only partly through the yen clearing experiment?
I agree with that view. I agree with the view that the unwind of the carry trade is not completed yet. I am very cautious in trying to quantify how much we've seen and how much is left. But if you look at some of the indicators, such as the CFTC numbers, for instance, which gives you a little bit of a flavor as to where we are, it would appear that the market is still underweight the yen. So yes, the answer is we're probably not done yet. And to go back to the early point you were making about the BOJ, I also feel that, yes, the BOJ had a big part to play in that move last week and in the past few weeks. But for me, it's been very much, Fed driven. Mm-hmm. And I also feel that the next leg, I don't know if you can call it second, but the next leg lower in dollar yen will also be mainly Fed driven.
Do you have a target on that? That's important. If we get through 150, where does Audrey Childe-Freeman feel weak yen can go?
So I think at the moment it's very difficult to give you a level right now. Just the direction is if you get the direction right, you're a hero. But I think the level what I will wait to see is where the new ranges establish themselves. We're still not sure that we're not going to see another big wave of moves in the next few sessions. We've gone to 142 intraday on Monday. We're back at 147 today, just on the BOJ rate mentioned this morning. Yesterday we were at 145. So what I need to see first is the new kind of range that we base ourselves from 145 to 150, and that's where I kind of expect it to be. And if so, what do we do? And what I do is I wait for the next trigger to move lower, and I kind of feel that next trigger may come from the US. but it won't be as extreme as what we've seen in the past few sessions and weeks.
Audrey, I think a lot of folks are trying to get a handle on, you get the yen going from 160 to 140. Now we're back at, kind of 147. What's moving the yen? Is it the Bank of Japan? Is it the market? I mean, is this normal? What's kind of moving this market so dramatically?
So it's certainly not normal. I just feel that it was very much a combination of factors together. So we talked about the weakness in the U.S. employment report last Friday, and I should say softness. It wasn't dramatically weak. It was just softer than what we'd become used to for the U.S. Employment reports, as well as the BOJ coming up more hawkish than expected last week, and this was happening at a time when positioning was had become extreme earlier in the summer. Certainly when we were trading at 162. And the final point I would add, the kind of icing on the cake last week was it's still difficult to assess what triggered what, but certainly the risk-off market sentiment that we had via our asset classes equity market downside, that exacerbated the unwind on some of the crosses and EMFX and EM yen.
Right.
For instance, that's another reason.
Audrey, quickly, I got only 1 minute. How do you use real yield analysis right now? How do you use inflation-adjusted yields in your study?
Well, what we think is that the U.S. and the Fed disinflationary story should allow the Fed to cut interest rates. And remember that the narrative on the Fed has moved so much in the course of the year. And that's, from talking rate hike a few months ago to no hike at all to maybe a precautionary rate cut, and now we're talking about a series of rate cuts for this year. We're talking about 100 bips rate cuts. So this is happening in the context of disinflation in the US, and that's probably enough to take your dollar narrative lower.
This has been helpful. Audrey Childe-Freeman, thank you so much. Publishing at Bloomberg Intelligence. Can't say enough about that. A value add on the Bloomberg terminal. You're in the surveillance timeout chair.
Am I?
I mean, just plain and simple.
All right. Get out, Lisa.
You have blown up YouTube live chat where they're going Wilbur-Krenner Speedo when I swim the River Seine.
Yep.
And you know where this is going.
Right.
And so they say, do you own? I don't own a Speedo.
No, okay.
But what's good is Farrell loaned me. He's got a Def Leppard Speedo.
No.
And it's blown up here online. I mean, people just can't get over it. I mean, you should see it. Love bites and all that.
Sure. There you go.
There it is. Good morning, folks. Would you swim? It's on YouTube live chat. Seriously, would you swim in the cleaned up Seine? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I would not.
It's an experience. Put on a wetsuit, you're good.
Maybe if you go in and you don't put your head in the water, maybe that's
all right. Yeah, that's all right. People are
swimming
in the Hudson River.
There you go.
I tell you, the Jersey Shore ocean water clear as it's ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Still a little cold, but that's okay.
And the temperature's up to where you can almost stay in for 3 minutes.
We're all good.
Right?
We're all good. 70, gentlemanly 70.
But seriously, you got heavy rain coming. Rob Carolyn up and down the East Coast, folks. Seriously, Savannah, Charleston just crushed.
Yeah, exactly. The low country down there, they don't take water well down there in Georgia, South Carolina.
And then this is separate now, but do we get their rain later? I believe Rob
I think we do at the end of the week.
Yeah, well, thank to Rob Carolyn, best weather guy on the planet, for his updates there for Bloomberg Radio and for all that we're doing on YouTube, on Apple CarPlay, and Android Auto as well. A bit of levity this morning. You can do that after a 2-day rally off the crater of Monday. Futures up 53. From New York, it's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Monday sell-off, well, it seems to be in the rearview mirror for now. We have NASDAQ futures up more than 1%. Same for S&P futures. Dow futures up about 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.99%, up 2 basis points. The yields on the 10-year are 3.94%, and that's up 4 basis points. Stocks in Japan up more than 1%. The Bank of Japan official pledged to refrain from hiking interest rates when the markets are unstable. We'll head over to currencies right now. We have the Japanese yen down more than 1.5%, 147.01 against a dollar. Shares of Shopify, they're higher. They're up about 18%. Second quarter revenue beat estimates. Then you have online grocery retailer Instacart up 9%, reported a sales beat. And Warner Music Group, third quarter revenue missed estimates. Shares, though, up about 0.8%. After the bell, we move on to Warner Brothers Discovery, Zillow, and Bumble. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Getting over here, I'm looking. I got Disney earnings on the screen. That's yesterday's news. Not much economic data in a quiet week. Of course, into tomorrow's claims, I should point out, Michael McKee doing good work on claims this morning. He's in a quiet time, so he's doing some nice academic work there. And that gets towards our economic indicators. Brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio. Small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. Commonwealth, foundational to our economic coverage. Always a joy to have Matthew Luzzetti darken the door. He's with the Combine at Deutsche Bank, which has been a massive value add to surveillance out of the pandemic. And in all, you and I were talking here about measured. The reason a Fed is measured is because we want to provide stability, a confidence, an anchor. It makes for a bigger keel on the sailboat. Are we over-measured?
No, I don't think so. I think, if you go back a few weeks ago, there was this sense that the Fed was going to be moving at a quarterly pace, cutting rates, because they were mostly just responding to lower inflation. When we reset our Fed view a few weeks ago, we thought that they'd be moving a little bit quicker than that up front, going at every meeting this year. And the reason was, we thought that they'd be worried about downside risks to the economy and the labor market. Now, clearly those concerns around downside risks have come to the fore. I think we still expect that they will be somewhat measured in their response here, as long as financial conditions allow them to be. Now, the stability that we've had over the past day and a half or 2 days is helpful in that regard. But I do think that they need to see some reversal of the weakness in that jobs report. And I think that there's good reasons to think so. There was some weather effects. Temp help workers, or temporary layoffs actually drove some of the rise in the unemployment rate. But I think the debate now is 25 versus 50, rather than going at every meeting versus going at a quarterly pace.
Were you surprised at the jobs number on Friday and then the market's reaction to the jobs number? Did that surprise you over the past, that Friday, Monday trading time frame?
Certainly the size of the moves is very surprising. When you wake up on Monday morning and you're seeing the 2-year yield down 25 to 30 basis points, and futures down 4 or 5%, those are huge moves. And something that I don't think reflected the economic reality of that jobs report. Now, that jobs report was certainly weaker than anticipated across all the key metrics. And I think the market is highly leveraged to downside risks to the economy. Especially rates. Investors have wanted to be, long the front end, thinking about steepeners for a long period of time. And once the unemployment rate starts rising, they begin to really think about that trade more substantially. But the jobs report, I think, was exacerbated by some of the weather events. San Francisco Fed suggested reduced by 15 to 35,000. And so I would expect you get a little bit of a bounce back in the next jobs report.
And Torsten Slok, our good friend at Apollo, was out with a note this morning saying the source of the rise in the unemployment rate is not job cuts, but a rise in labor supply because of rising immigration. So the Sahm rule doesn't really work there and all that kind of stuff. So make note of that. Matt, there's a lot of folks out there that feels like, both in academia and in practice, that are saying the Fed's already behind the curve. They should have been cutting rates already, that the risk of a recession is really growing and it doesn't need to. Are you in that camp?
So I think the risk of a recession has grown. The Fed is responding to what I think has been the economic reality. And I think, when we originally were in the recession camp, very early on, and when we set that view, it was because inflation was so high and we thought persistent. The labor market was so tight. The Fed was going to have to respond aggressively. And then it was, they were going to be somewhat cautious in pulling back on that restraint that they had because of the shocks of inflation and the scarring effects of that. And so I think a lot of that is playing out. I think to a certain extent it makes a lot of sense. History has shown really defeating inflation can be difficult, and so when we got an inflation shock again earlier this year, it made some sense for them to be cautious. But if you look at policy rules, they are certainly telling them at this point in time they can start cutting rates, and we think that they will deliver at least a sequence of 25 basis point rate cuts.
The heritage of UCLA economics, and folks, it was such an East Coast bias. It was like Stanford and UCLA were those guys out there. That was the culture coming out of World War II. And the foundation of it is a respect for behavioral economics, where Chicago gets all the press and maybe Princeton, but UCLA had decades and decades of thinking of how we respond, almost the game theory of all this Fed chat. Is there massive regret aversion going on right now? Can you take Kahneman and Tversky 101 and pull it right over to a Fed that's scared stiff of making the wrong decision?
Look, I don't know that the Fed cutting rates in July would have helped or solved a lot of what we've seen play out. It has been driven, I think, importantly by divergences between central banks and a Bank of Japan that was more hawkish. If the Fed would have come in even more dovish than it would have had roiled markets.
Matt Luzzetti, do you agree that the ECB is trying to step away from a measured approach?
I think that they have the luxury of kind of responding to the data at this point in time. Some of the inflation data looks a little bit stickier than we're seeing in the U.S. But I anticipate that if the Fed is going to be cutting, that these other central banks are going to be able to follow their lead in that regard. I do think it's been a very tricky time for the Fed.
Agreed.
Because if they come in and they sound dovish or worried, it fuels the concerns that you had seen in markets. I think what they did has been appropriate. When you've heard Fed speakers over the past several days, they have suggested that the labor market is slowing, that they need to respond to that, but that they're not necessarily worried about the weakness that is there. And they're certainly not committing to a 50 basis point move or so. They want to see more data. It's always been about whether or not markets would allow them to. Hopefully they will. Hopefully the stability continues here, and we get to see another jobs report, and the Fed gets to decide between 25 or 50 in September.
What's your view of the consumer out there? We did have the unemployment rate tick up here. How do you feel about the consumer?
I think a lot of the aggregate consumer fundamentals remain reasonably resilient. So even though we had a softer jobs report, income growth was actually still pretty strong. Wealth gains are still resilient. When you look at the Fed Senior Loan Officer Survey this week, actually lending conditions are not as tight, or they're actually rolling over to a certain extent. And you're seeing some pickup in demand for credit. So all that is supportive. I think we've talked about before, though, that's not true for everybody. And there's a lot of stresses that are at the bottom end of the income distribution. One data point, though, that we also had this week was from the New York Fed on consumer delinquencies. The thing that got the headline was that consumer delinquencies continue to rise for autos and credit cards. I'm looking at the pace of those increases, because that's telling you the second derivative, Tom, as we often talk about. And it's slowing.
Calculus-free Wednesday. Luzzetti didn't get the memo.
Apologies. And that's slowing pretty materially. And so I think it's telling you that part is improving. I think as long as layoffs don't pick up, maybe a big if. But that's our baseline. And as long as that doesn't happen, I think the consumer remains resilient.
To Folkers Landau, nailing the fiscal expansion 4 years ago, whatever, is this a Fed that's a slave to the debt buildup of America?
No, I don't think so. Certainly, I think the fiscal response has helped to fuel some of the inflation that we've seen and the resilience in the economy, and the Fed has had to respond to that. But at the same time, they haven't been worried about debt service costs and those rising. They raised rates as they needed to, as aggressively as they needed to get back to their dual mandate objectives. Fiscal policy will continue to be important for the macroeconomy, and the Fed will respond to that, but I don't think that they're dominated by it.
Matt Luzzetti, thank you for the brief. The Deutsche Bank can't say enough about his skepticism of recession. He said, I'm supposed to model out a recession, but he refused to put a date on it. And he said, it's out there somewhere, and we're still waiting for out there somewhere. Matt Luzzetti is with Deutsche Bank. They're at the Deutsche Bank Center. Did you know that?
Well, it's a Deutsche Bank. It's One Columbus Circle. That's the old, the new Time Warner
He's
building.
surrounded, Matt Luzzetti is surrounded by restaurants that we can't afford.
No.
It's Maria.
Yeah, we're not going
And there's something, Jean Georges or something like that. And there's a McDonald's, too. It's down behind Nordstrom's as well. Matt Luzzetti with Deutsche Bank. He lifted the market. Futures up 50, now up 62. The VIX, 23.08. Not getting me to that key 21 level this morning. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris introduced her new running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at a rally in swing state Pennsylvania.
A leader who will help unite our nation and move us forward. A fighter for the middle class.
And Governor Walz came out fighting against former President Donald Trump.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
Well, the Harris campaign says it's raised $20 million after she announced her running mate. And a new poll from NPR, PBS News, and Marist College has Harris leading Donald Trump nationally 51% to 48%. Another political note, Cori Bush lost a bitter primary battle, further shrinking the squad of House progressives. The Missouri Democrat is an outspoken critic of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza. She lost to St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell. Hamas has named the alleged mastermind of the group's October 7th attack on Israel as its new political leader. He succeeds a key mediator whose assassination last week has set back ceasefire talks. Well, despite that, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says a deal could be near. And a 5.2 magnitude earthquake struck in Kern County, California last night. It was felt as far south as Los Angeles. It was a rolling type of quake that lasted for about 10 seconds. No reports of injuries or any major damage. And around 7 in 10 Americans say in the last year, extreme heat has had an impact on their electricity bills, ranging from minor to major. Most have seen at least a minor impact on their outdoor activities. This according to a new poll from the Associated Press. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today on Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, ibkr.com/forecast. Interesting. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for that. So the Olympics, we all have our favorites. Mine is the pole vault.
Really?
I wanted to do it as a kid, and I watched him do it, and I said, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. And the kid from Sweden, the first time he set the Olympic record, and he was like 6-7 inches above the bar.
Okay. Plenty of clearance.
And so then when
Could you see Tom pole vaulting?
No, trust me, you can't. It never happened. But to me, it's still the most amazing. I mean, there's other things. The 100-yard dash is great.
Yeah.
And the 1,500 meter, which is like the mile. But to see this kid from Sweden last night break the world record, and Paul, it was not teens weens. You know, there was no worry about his hand hitting the bar. It was he could have easily gone 2 or 3 inches more.
It's amazing. I mean, it's just the heights these guys, men and women are going these days is crazy.
Thank you to NBC for that coverage and State Street Global with our Olympic updates.
Yep.
That was my Olympic update.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, track and field, I look at it probably once every 4 years, but I love it. But
come on, it's the real Olympics.
Yes.
Tucker's at home watching breakdancing.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. He's into the new stuff. He's into what all the kids are watching. But track and field is the Olympics in my mind.
It is the Olympics. Mondo Duplantis, thank you so much for that. Ariel, thank you for that vignette. Can come on, let's be honest. Lisa Mateo pole vaulting.
I could see that.
It's feasible.
I could see that.
Lisa,
gymnast,
come on.
I could see.
When you were done with the WPIX chair on the wire, did you do the pole vault? You've never.
No, I've never done that.
Okay.
It's on the list, though.
It's on the list. We'll see if we can get to it this weekend. Lisa Mateo, pole vaulting. Futures up 62 for New York City. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. The stock rebound continues. Monday's massive sell-off right now. The Nasdaq futures up more than 1%. We have S&P futures same there. Dow futures up more than 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.99%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.93%, and that's up 4 basis points. Commodities, spot gold higher, $2,404 an ounce. We have Brent crude $78 a barrel. WTI crude $74 a barrel. Over to Japan's Honda reported a nearly 9% raise in profit. That was thanks to strong demand for its motorcycles, for its cars, but shares are lower. They're down about 0.8% over in Japan. EV startup Rivian down 8%. Second quarter revenue missed estimates, and cash burn for the period that was also bigger than expected. And computer hardware maker Super Microcomputer down 13%, reported quarterly revenue and profit that missed estimates. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciated. Futures up 61, and technically I need a VIX of 21 to get excited. I'm not there yet. 23.08. Right now, and seriously, this could be a 3-hour conversation because of perspective and wisdom. And let's just cut it to the chase. Joe Weisenthal, Tracy Ellaway with us. Did Pablo step in and buy at 10 p.m. on Monday?
No, Pablo thought there was going to be a 75 basis point emergency Fed cut because stocks fell 6%. He was worried.
Tracy had to calm him down.
Treats.
Yeah. And then our other question before Paul jumps in with the seriousness of odd lots and the excellence, and particularly in crisis when VIX expands, is, light sweet crude tied it up August 1st.
That's
after
right.
Your tour. How'd it go?
Oh, were you there?
No, we tried to get there.
Tracy came. It went really well. We had our biggest crowd. We played well. It was right in the middle of Fed week, so there was plenty to sing about. Fun times.
No tubes broken.
No, we didn't blow. No blown amps.
Okay.
No broken strings.
So, Paul, why don't you get us started here? Odd lots in crisis.
Absolutely. So, Tracy, what did you guys make of kind of what we saw over the past several days here with the weaker than expected jobs data to kind of really catch the market off guard a little bit?
No, totally. And we had on Charlie McGilligan over from Nomura, really smart guy, especially when it comes to the vol complex. And he makes the point that, this is kind of a volatility event. It's not a stocks event. It's definitely not a fixed income or a credit event. It's played out in the vol complex. And he points to, for instance, skew, which is, demand for downside protection versus demand for upside protection. Right. We had a big shift in skew. So lots of people in 2023 were worried about a recession. So there was lots of demand for downside protection. And then in 2024, suddenly the recession kind of fades into the distance and everyone's thinking about the rally and catching on to that. And so there's a lot of demand for upside protection. And so what we saw last week was basically the collision of that positioning with a change in the macro outlook. Suddenly, a recession isn't a zero probability event, and everyone has to chase that downside protection.
Paul, I never give my opinion. I 100% agree with Nomura's expert on this. I can't say enough how vol analysis now is critical, and everybody should just calm down and go long light sweet crude.
Exactly. So, Joe, you had your Nomura guest, Charlie McGilligan. Was he suggesting that it was kind of a flash?
Well,
or is there something more fundamentally concerning in these markets?
I think the way he put it is that you've been rewarded now for a while betting essentially various versions of buying the dip, right? That's been the mantra for a long time. Buy the dip, markets go down, buy it. But there are other flavors of buying the dip. Selling volatility is another way of describing buying the dip. Various trades, momentum trades are another way of sort of expressing mean reversion, or what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow. And what he puts it is we had this sort of very weak Thursday and Friday in the U.S., and then as he puts it, the dip buyers got their fingers blown off Monday with that big unwind in Japan. And it's going to take a while, in his view, until, you can get burned once and then you get burned twice. And okay, you got to sit this out. And so it's going to take a while, as he puts it, for the risk budgets to reemerge so that people feel comfortable making that mean reversion dip buying bet again.
The distinction to me is you got two events, Econ Babel, Fed's Talk, and all that, Jackson Hole, which we're all going to be at here. And then you've also got, Sweeney's coming. I'm putting in my suitcase. And then you've got the Japanese carry unwind and the vol thing and all that. I look at those as discrete events, separate events. In most of my conversations, they're saying, no, they're correlated. Do you buy it?
Well, the thing that annoys me about the discourse around the yen carry trade is like people seem to be talking about as the cause for the volatility. It's not. Like it's a symptom of the low volatility environment.
Outcome. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Like the notion that we had a $1 trillion stock market sell off because traders cut their short yen positioning by $8 billion in a week is insane to me. And if it was all the carry trade unwind, you would have seen more of an impact in fixed income and credit.
Right.
You didn't. You saw it in equities and
Joe,
vol.
is it correlated or are they disparate?
This is the key thing to me, which is that if you're a trader and you're borrowing yen to buy some risky asset, you're doing that because you're betting that stability will reign and that the calm that we've seen in volatility markets, it's basically an explicit short volatility bet. So to separate it as its own distinct thing that's just like, oh, here's this other thing that happened is wrong, because you have to ask the question first, well, if there was all this money that was sort of borrowing yen, buying some risky assets, why were people making that trade in the first place, and what changed that would shake them out? And the answer is, well, they were low volatility. People were expecting the Fed might engineer a soft landing, all this stuff. Suddenly that comes into question between Wednesday and Friday of last week. And so it's not about the yen carry trade per se. It's about what were the assumptions behind the yen carry trade and why did it sort of hurt people involved in it, like many other traders got hurt too. I mean, look, another version of that trade is just going long Mag 7 relative to everything else. Stability reigns. What happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow, and then one day that doesn't, you lose a lot of money.
Is that yen carry trade, which I'm not even sure I fully understand, other than how you explained it, that's the extent of my knowledge. Has that been unwound? Is it unwinding? Does it unwind? Did we know what's the data telling us?
So this is the funny thing. You see numbers that are like, oh, it's 14 billion if you look at the Commitment of Traders report, which is just looking at hedge fund positioning in like specific yen trades. And then you see figures like some people are rolling out like, oh, it's $200 billion worth of exposure because they're looking at like total ownership by Japanese institutional investors of mutual funds, which I really doubt like every Japanese retail investor has gone out and borrowed in yen and is investing in dollars.
Or life insurers FX hedging their U.S. Treasury purchases, things like that.
But really, like, just getting back to the main point, like, it is an outcome of the low volatility regime that we've seen. It is one strategy in low vol, but the reason it matters is Charlie had this great line where he says volatility is the exposure toggle in modern market structure. Volatility matters, and volatility details positioning.
We've discovered this today, and that to me there's I said to someone yesterday, I said, let's be honest, Joe Weisenthal in a dorm room at Texas helped invent this immediacy of financial media, the immediacy of the headlines, our addiction to speed. We didn't have that in the crash in 1987.
Right, I thought you did.
No, we had carrier pigeons. We had no idea what was going on.
I had blue tickets for buy and pink tickets for sell.
And they were all on the floor, and people were literally crying on the floors. And now everybody's tuned into you guys saying, what do we do? It's in a whole new world.
One of my favorite ever market crashes was from, I think it was 1968 or 1967, where it ended up getting slowed down because the ticker tape wasn't working.
That would be true, yeah.
It's kind of funny. You don't get that
it's hilarious at the time. Let me tell you. Odd lots, folks, and listen to the gentleman from Nomura out there. I'm sure with some good conversation going on. Odd lots, look for that on Apple Podcasts and where you get your podcasts worldwide. Joe, I got a song for you, which is one of the greatest song structures of modern rock.
I'll listen to it right now.
Steven Tyler. We're doing Aerosmith today because they're really struggling with age and all that. And the song Jaded is absolutely brilliant song structure, and just a video, and it was about his daughter and all that. Forget about it. It's just a great song. We're doing this for Light Sweet Crude. Look for them in your town soon.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Tucker in. Tucker can't get home. The water is so deep.
No, exactly.
Out on the shores of New Jersey. He said, I'll stay here and keep working. John Tucker in for Michael Barr, and that's a good thing. This 9 o'clock hour, we heal, we recover. Futures up 50, now up 61. Dow futures up 328. I am not at a critical VIX level on a technical basis. I put the chart out, I believe, this morning on Twitter and LinkedIn. I need a 21 handle really to close a loop. I'm not there yet. 23.01 on a better VIX. We're going to get to this quickly because we got a superstar in the studio. For those of you on Global Wall Street, our must-listen fixed income discussion here. Ian Lyngen with us in moments. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And stocks rallying after a Bank of Japan official pledged to refrain from hiking interest rates when the markets are unstable. We have NASDAQ futures up nearly 1.5%, S&P futures up more than 1%, Dow futures up 0.8%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.99%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.93%, and that's up 3 basis points. A little wider look, wanted to take a look at the Nikkei up 1%. We have the stock 600 up about 1.5%. DAX in Germany, CAC in Paris, and FTSE in London all up more than 1.5%. We go over to currencies. We have the Japanese yen up more than 1.5% at 147.01 against the dollar. To earnings we go. Shares of Lyft, well, they're falling. They're down 13%. Bookings, outlook, missed estimates. CVS Health lowered its 2024 earnings outlook for the 3rd straight quarter. Shares were lower. Now they're up about 1%. And finally, Walt Disney, their first ever profit in streaming. A turnaround in the movie business. It comes after the company announced it was raising the prices of its streaming service. Shares have been kind of all over the place. Right now, they're down more than 1.5%. After the bell, we're on to Warner Brothers Discovery, Zillow, and Bumble. That is your Bloomberg Business
Zillow
Flash.
and Bumble.
Bumble.
These are all
Yes,
blue
the
chip.
dating app.
Dow
Dating
Jones,
app.
future Dow
Swipe
Jones
right, swipe left.
equivalent. What's Bumble?
It's a dating app. It's
Yeah.
one of those where you swipe right, you swipe left, and that's how the kids do it today.
Oh, really?
See, I do it the old-fashioned way. You just go into a bar.
You go into a bar.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, I'm not going there.
It worked for me.
This is a joy. And, people go to me, why do you celebrate people that get it wrong? And I had a blistering argument once with some people about this. You learn just as much from people who get it wrong as you do from people to get it right. But it's always a joy to have somebody in who absolutely nailed this. And he has an informative note this morning from the Bank of Montreal, BMO Capital Markets. With the victory lap of the last 18 months, Ian Lyngen with a 10-year yield below 4%. Did you figure we would go price up, yield down in this manner? Or did you just make the guess and we got there for a different reason?
I've been reasonably confident that something would break with the terminal rate as high as it was for as long as it was. We're going to end up with 421 days at 5.5% as the upper bound come the 18th of September. And that is going to be not a record, but a very significant degree of tightening.
I talked to Matt Luzzetti. I didn't get to this. I'm going to get to it right now with Ian Lyngen. Nice move there, Paul, to change the mic around. It's like he's, Paul could work at the Olympics in Paris on that to get the mic in front of pole vaulting. Ian, I didn't get to this with Luzzetti, but the answer is formulas like the Taylor rule are wildly distant now from where the Fed is. How urgent is it that the Fed catch up to what John Taylor at Stanford says, or other people, frankly, say they should be?
I think that the Fed is cognizant of this, and that's why they opened the discussion. They laid the groundwork for rate cuts in December of last year. Recall Powell's pivot.
Yeah.
Now, that didn't play out, and we all remember what happened between January and March. But by opening that discussion, the Fed has allowed the market to do some of the heavy lifting for it. So that's one of the reasons that equities had been performing as well as they had. And real rates, while elevated, were not at concerning levels as we have seen in prior cycles.
So I'm an equity guy. I don't know what this rate market thing is all about. I go to you guys in Ira, Jersey. Is 50 basis points baked in for September, or is there still some debate about September?
I think it's still a very active debate about September. I'm in the 25 basis point camp, and the logic there is we have 3 more key data releases before the Fed decides. We have 2 CPI prints and a payrolls number. And frankly, Friday's number, while it was somewhat troubling, was certainly not catastrophic. We have an unemployment rate that's still below 4.5%. We have positive payrolls growth. And at the end of the day, the Fed wanted to instill a degree of balance into the labor market, and that's precisely what they got.
Monday morning, there was a little bit of panic in the market, it felt like. I hadn't felt that in a while. I hadn't seen that in a while. People were actually talking about an emergency rate cut. Is that something, or is that just overblown concern on a Monday morning?
Well, given the price action that played out on Monday morning, what was going on with the yen, what was going on with Japanese equities and global equities more broadly, one would have been remiss not to at least have an emergency cut as a potential. But now we've stabilized. And as we've stabilized, the bar has increased for the Fed to consider cutting rates before the 18th of September.
I came in this morning, and this is the glory days of 20 years ago. It's how I got my job. I used to construct fancy charts. Okay, I did log VIX. That's its own story. It's away from Ian Lyngen. But I did log inflation-adjusted 10-year real yield, the real yield. So I had a higher real yield as far back as July, 2.00%, 2.02. We gloriously come in. Then we have Japan. We come in even further. Where's a normal real yield right now? I think even global Wall Street doesn't know what to do here at a 1.80. Is that elevated still?
I would say that that's still elevated, and the Fed would argue that's still restrictive. But the reality is we don't need to go back to zero in terms of real rates.
Where do we need to go to get an efficacy for the overall financial system?
I think that our estimate's somewhere in the 50 to 75 basis point range.
Under 1%?
Under 1%.
You got to be kidding me. That's un-American. No wonder they're Canadian shocked. That's why. Are you kidding me?
No, I think that that's actually a reasonable level to assume for real rates over the next 10 years.
So you're modeling out a 6% nominal GDP. If we get a pop down to 0.50 positive 10-year inflation-adjusted yield, you're goosing. You got to be goosing out the 6% nominal unless you get global disinflation, right?
And what's to assume that we won't find ourselves in a disinflationary environment globally?
Agreed.
And I think that that's what we're running up against. And that's what, to a large extent, the Fed is trying to avoid. And that's why they're being as proactive.
I mentioned this, Paul, 3 times this week. Last week, single sentence that mattered. Wei-Li BlackRock. She's modeling China at a 3% run rate.
Yep.
Nobody, even Ian Lyngen. Lisa Mateo's ready for that, but not Ian Lyngen.
Ian, when the Fed starts cutting rates, let's assume it's September, how do they proceed from there? Is it every 25 basis points every meeting, every other meeting? Do they keep it open maybe at 50 points at some point? How does that work usually?
Well, we're certainly in a atypical environment insofar as the Fed is not responding to a crisis, at least not yet.
Okay.
All they're doing is going from restrictive to less restrictive. So they're not easing in the traditional sense. And so that will afford them the opportunity to deliver quarterly rate cuts if they deem necessary. So 25 basis points a quarter is our base case scenario.
Okay.
Depending on what the next couple weeks gives us in terms of data, we might actually pencil in another 25 for November.
How about the political aspect to it? I mean, it's an election year. How does the Fed historically deal with that?
Are you talking Canada or U.S.?
I'm talking U.S.
Okay.
I think that the presidential election has made it a bit more difficult for the Fed to do either a 50 or an intermediate cut because there's the political aspect of it. But 25 has been well telegraphed and is baked into the market.
I got to make some news here. You've been a genius. I can't say enough, folks, how Lyngen's led the charge. David Rosenberg, what is it about Canada?
I don't know.
Montreal, and Rosenberg up in Toronto. It's the air, the water. Maybe it's the Labatt's. Molson. I'm sorry, Bank of Montreal. But Ian Lyngen, help me here. If I get a 0.50 10-year real yield, where does that put nominal 10-year in the Lyngen universe?
Well, we will be pushing back below 3%. Now, that's not going to be this year. but that is certainly on the horizon for, let's call it, the next 24 months.
You are modeling sub 3% 10-year, 2.95%.
Yeah, by the end of 2026, very doable.
All right, I'm going to refinance the mortgage there. Now we're talking.
Ian Lyngen, thank you so much at BMO Capital Markets. I can't say enough about it. Folks, it's the most valuable fixed income note. Good morning, Ira Jersey, on the street. Go to BMO Capital Markets to see what Lingen's thinking each and every morning. Futures, he did not affect equity futures.
No.
He did not.
Still solid.
With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul. Kamala Harris has introduced her new running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at a rally in Philadelphia.
Since the day that I announced my candidacy, I set out to find a partner who can help build this brighter future.
Vice President Harris calling Governor Walz a fighter for the middle class. He came out fighting against former President Trump.
Donald Trump's not fighting for you or your family. He never sat at that kitchen table like the one I grew up at, wondering how we were going to pay the bills. He sat at his country club up in Mar-a-Lago, wondering how he can cut taxes for his rich friends.
Tim Walz and Kamala Harris face a whirlwind campaign blitz this week. They're holding rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan today. The Harris campaign says United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain will join them today in Detroit. A new NPR PBS Marist poll has Harris ahead of Donald Trump now by 3 percentage points among registered voters nationally. Congresswoman Cori Bush lost a bitter primary battle driven by Democratic divisions over Israel, further shrinking the squad of House progressives. An outspoken critic of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza, the Missouri Democrat was defeated by St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell. Bell benefited from $9.5 million in ad spending from pro-Israel groups. Boeing is redesigning the fuselage component that blew out of a nearly new 737 MAX 9 aircraft mid-flight back in January as the plane maker seeks to draw lessons from the accident. The company revealed the plan during a day-long hearing with the National Transportation Safety Board, which grilled executives from Boeing and their supplier Spirit AeroSystems about their safety and manufacturing culture. And declaring that there should never be a government label on ammunition used in a mass shooting, congressional Democrats are planning to introduce legislation today that would forbid the Pentagon from allowing bullets made in an Army-owned munition plant to be sold to civilians. The federally owned Lake City Army ammunition plant, which is operated by the manufacturer Winchester Ammunition, produces about 1.6 million rounds of military-grade ammunition a year, half of which sold on the commercial market. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Tom.
I remember the day when Marlboro cigarettes, never liked them, priced themselves out of the market.
What is it now for a pack of cigarettes?
I haven't. It's outrageous. Park hopper plus option. Visit multiple theme parks each day and have more fun at Walt Disney. $501.82 per ticket.
Wow.
For, I think, 3 days. So the Fab Four go down, you're talking $2,000. I mean, we're talking, on deck circle, Yankee Stadium pricing.
Yeah.
Have they priced themselves out of America?
A lot of folks think so, but the numbers don't show it. I mean, they've always had, mid-single-digit growth in attendance, low to mid-single-digit pricing growth, and that gives you a high single-digit revenue growth in the parks, and they have great profit margins there.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks rallying after the Bank of Japan moved to reassure markets. Right now, NASDAQ futures up more than 1%. Same for S&P futures, Dow futures up 0.7%. We have the 2-year yield at 3.99%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.93%, and that's up 4 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,402 an ounce. Brent crude $77 a barrel. WTI crude $74 a barrel. Moving the markets, telecommunications telecommunications company Lumen Technologies, they're up 44%. The company says a surge in AI demand leading to a surge in sales. It also boosted its full year free cash flow forecast. Companies making news. That would be Microsoft. It's joined CrowdStrike in saying that Delta actually rejected repeated offers for technical help to restore its systems. Microsoft up more than 1%. You have CrowdStrike up more than 3%. Delta is up about 1%. And finally, the weight loss drug market seeing more competition. That's having an impact on Novo Nordisk. It reported disappointing sales. Its weight loss treatment, Wegovy. ADRs are down more than 5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The Summer Games, the Olympic Games in Paris. Summer Game updates. They're brought to you by State Street Global Advisors. So this is what happens. And when they built Bloomberg Intelligence years ago, and it's not a small item for those of you on YouTube that Gina Martin Adams is wearing Home Depot orange. When the VIX explodes over 30, there is a bunker underneath Home Depot here at our world headquarters. Yep. It's just under the tool section.
Okay.
There's that steel door where they say, employees only.
Only, yep.
No, it's where Gina Martin Adams and our equity team go when the VIX goes over 30. They go down in the bunker, and they got a beautiful backdrop of her home and bookcases and all that. She's down in the bunker right now beneath Home Depot. Gina Martin Adams, when is it all clear to think rationally about equities again?
Oh, it's a really great question. I mean, I think that we've already reached some pretty critical technical points. You mentioned the VIX above 30. And not by coincidence, we have what I call a 30-30 rule. The VIX above 30 and RSI at 30 or below has historically led to positive returns for the equity markets 80% of the time. So we got there on Monday, which is the good news in this, is at least in the short term, over the next 3 months, we should experience a bit of recovery after the losses. But I think broadly, this is mostly about Japan and the unwind of a carry trade that has been in play for 17 years. The move from the Bank of Japan last week is no small thing, and it certainly is playing out in global equity markets. So overnight, when we got word from the Bank of Japan that they're not going to increase rates again as long as markets are unstable, that helps a lot. Now, I do think, though, over the series of the next several months, this is also going to be about the Fed. And that spread between Japanese policy rates and Fed policy rates is the really key indicator to watch. If we can continue to see some stabilization in the currency, reflecting sort of stable interest rate spreads, then the carry trade is unlikely to materially create waves in the equity markets. But it remains to be seen. I think it really is about policy and that spread, and we need to be careful and pretty vigilant at watching that spread for further downside risk. All
right, so we'll keep an eye on that, Gina. How about earnings? What are we learning from earnings so far?
Yeah, earnings season's been phenomenal, Paul. I think it's kind of underappreciated just how much not only U.S. earnings, but global earnings are creating a backstop for equity markets right now. There's a lot of chatter in the market about macro risk. Are we falling into recession? Aren't we? Are we going to see the unemployment rate continue to rise? By how much? What does it mean? But beside that, earnings are telling you that we're actually in an early cycle recovery. We finally are getting positive earnings growth outside of the Mag 7 for the first time in more than a year. We're getting double-digit earnings growth for the index at large. We're tracking close to 13% earnings growth now on a year-over-year basis. Analysts were expecting only 8%. And when we look forward, the analyst outlook is still pretty positive for earnings growth, and especially positive for that ex-Mag 7, ex-AI space, which has really trailed in this market. Analysts are expecting a continuous recovery there. So as much as we're sort of clutching our pearls over the macro, the earnings environment is very, very stable, only producing a backstop for equity markets.
Do you think Gina wore pearls at Wells Fargo years ago? I mean, it's a look,
It could be. You
never know. When you're out with buy-side, guys like you, animals like you, right? Some clients you wear pearls, but others you don't.
It's II voting season. It
Wear the
closes on
pearls.
Friday. It closes on Friday. Do
There it
whatever you
is.
need to do. So, Gina, is this a time now where we can see some real strides in things other than the big tech names?
Yeah, I think it is, Paul. It does look to us, especially with how financials really kicked off this earnings season. Financials tripled the pace of earnings growth expected by analysts, with the yield curve becoming more upward sloping, with now it becoming likely that the Fed does at least incrementally ease over the course of the next 12 months. That's great for the financial space. And this has been somewhat of a laggard in the broader recovery, which has been mostly focused on tech. Outside of financials, you're starting to see signs of life in some of the commodity-sensitive segments as well, energy materials and industrials. Energy and materials were horrible earnings drags over the course of the last year, producing greater than double-digit declines in earnings growth. Now we're starting to see some stabilization there, which will help a lot. And then the last big laggard was healthcare. Healthcare really struggled in 2023 with double-digit declines in earnings growth as well that are now starting to clear. So a lot of the weaknesses that were really plaguing the earnings stream are starting to clear out. And then we're starting to get a little bit of sign of growth for some of the early cyclicals.
Right. Gina, are you and your team, and I make jokes about the bunker underneath Home Depot, but you're grinding this 7 days a week. Do you have any diminished free cash flow growth rate?
No, free cash flow is only recovering. If anything, what you've got is peak acceleration in free cash flow growth is now past for the tech growth space.
The second derivative
That
is
doesn't mean
done.
we're not going to grow, but will we grow as fast when the comps are getting harder? No.
Do you have a blended
but we're
number?
still showing very positive earnings growth.
Do you have a
and cash flow
blended
growth.
number on free cash flow growth? Can you get it above nominal GDP?
Oh, it is above nominal GDP already, especially when you include the Mag 7. That laggard has been the ex-Mag 7 growth, which has been, really struggling over the last several quarters. That should surpass nominal GDP growth over the course of the next 4. And I think it's important to remember that the S&P 500 is not purely reflective of the U.S. economy. Right. And so the S&P 500 very much so has very different biases in market cap concentration and different global exposures.
So, Paul, when you put together Bloomberg Intelligence, the model is the equity team can't come out of the bunker under Home Depot tools until the VIX is 19.99.
Got to get it below 20, no question about it.
We got to get below 20, and then Gina can come up and
exactly. Gina, we are seeing earnings estimates on the rise. Is that enough to support? Is that enough to allay concerns about valuation that I know a lot of investors have?
Yeah, look, I think you have to manage a lot of different factors in the equity market right now. Really, the macro has been the bigger drag, and what's happening with policy, not only in the U.S., but globally, has been overwhelming anything on the earnings in terms of earnings news over the last couple of quarters. At the same time, when you really dig into earnings, what we are experiencing is a period of time in which valuations did explode for a certain segment of the index, and that is the big 7, right? The Magnificent 7 valuation ratio is just too high relative to the rest of the index, and tech at large had valuations, price to sales ratios, more than 4,000 basis points above their 5-year norm in comparison to the index. Yeah. So we were overly enthusiastic and sort of overly concentrated in specific portions of the index, and that's now normalizing. I think that earnings are fine, but there was just no way for some of the big cap tech companies to come into this earnings season and succeed, if you will, with heavy quotation marks, with respect to reaching those estimates implied in valuation multiples.
Gina Martin Adams, thank you so much. With Bloomberg Intelligence driving our equity coverage, she lifts the market futures up 60, NASDAQ up 1.6%. I do want to know dollar yen not near a 150. That's a real important tip point. Thank you, Audrey Childe-Freeman, for perspective this morning from London. Dollar yen 147.01. Paul, your observation.
Yeah, just some movements here. So the recovery in the stock market, just over the past couple of days, not retracing all the losses, but really just setting this tone. I think Joe Weisenthal said some stability, bringing that back into the marketplace. And I think that's of note here after what we experienced on Monday.
We will see. We will continue our coverage on economics, finance, investment. We need to get the market open, a calming market. Bloomberg Surveillance from New York City.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So will stocks continue to extend their gains? You had that Bank of Japan official pledging to not hike interest rates when the markets are unstable. So that changed sentiment a bit. Then you had the S&P 500, NASDAQ 100 rebounded more than 1% yesterday. That was amid that wave of dip buying. So let's see how things shape up for midweek trading. We'll start with the S&P 500, up more than 1%, 57 points at 5,297. have the Dow up 0.6%, 259 points at 39,245. And the NASDAQ up more than 1.5%, 259 points at 16,621. We head over to the 2-year yield, 4.00%. That's up 2 basis points. We have the yield on the 10-year, 3.94%. That's up about 4 basis points. I want to point out the Nikkei, that's up about 1%. And we head over to currencies. We have Japanese yen down nearly 2% at 147.14 against the dollar. Over to currencies, spot gold higher, 2,401 an ounce. We have Brent crude $77 a barrel, WTI crude $74 a barrel. And at the open, want to check in with Walt Disney. Shares down 3%. Posted first ever profit in streaming department, but it's kind of offsetting that sluggish performance at its theme parks. But shares still lower, down more than 3%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I have a benchmark here in Hollywood. Let me see how it's doing. I haven't looked since the debacle, as they call it, Monday. There it is. Well, Warner Brothers Discovery, Paul, has not gone down to new lows, June lows.
Okay.
But boy, it's 80% of the way there.
Yeah, it's been a tough ride, down 30% year to date, almost 50% over the trailing 12 months.
It'll be interesting to see, to say the least. This is Joy. Gregory Daco with us now, chief economist, EY, Ernst & Young, Parthenon. Thrilled that he's with us. He writes a really, really smart note. Greg, I want to go someplace we haven't gone, which is the immediate economic data. Are you getting benefit in analyzing the jobless claims we will see tomorrow? Do they give you a value?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, they do give us a little bit of a value in terms of the trend for the unemployment rate. We know that that's been the most concerning element in terms of the economic landscape. The rise in the unemployment rate, not so much the level, which remains quite low historically, but the direction of travel is really what's most concerning and has recession fears on high alert. So yes, the claims do provide that indication of whether we're seeing an ongoing upward trend in the number of people filing for unemployment claims or whether there will be a plateau.
Torsten Slok at Apollo looks at Marshallian dynamics of labor, which nobody ever looks at, folks. You know, you think of supply and demand of Red Sox World Series tickets. There's a dynamic there we all understand. Nobody looks at the supply and demand of labor. It's like chapter 14 in an economic textbook. And Dr. Slok, Greg, shows that we've got a unique immigration-driven economy with increasing supply. Discuss the oddities now of the microeconomics of labor.
I think we are in an environment increasingly where the supply side of the economy matters more, right? Over the last 3-4 decades, demand was the only thing that really mattered. And increasingly, it's supply that matters, whether it's the supply of capital, the supply of labor, or the supply of goods. They all matter greatly from a business perspective. When it comes to labor, we are in this unusual environment where we had a sudden stop to both supply and demand after the pandemic. Then demand came back very rapidly and supply took a bit longer. If you look at today's labor market, we have a rebalanced labor market, but we still have a lot of momentum coming out of the supply side, whether driven by people rejoining the labor force or by immigration. And I think that's why we have to be a little bit careful with regards to rules like my good friend Claudia Sam's rule on this potential for the unemployment rate to rise whenever there is a recession. If it's driven by supply side factors, which I think is very much part of the picture, then it's less concerning than if it were only driven by a weakening of labor demand factors. And I think that's very important to focus on. And I think that's why Torsten and others are focused as well on the supply side of labor than the demand side.
All right, Greg, how about inflation? We're going to get some more inflation data next week with PPI and CPI. Has that been whipped here in your mind? Is it, or is still work to do?
I think it's been whipped a long time ago. I mean, I've been arguing for the Fed to start recalibrating monetary policy for a few months now. I think that's why the Fed is behind the curve. It's not so much about July. July was one point at which the Fed could have eased monetary policy. But I've said in the past that if you look at economic fundamentals, they continue to point to disinflation. You have an environment where pricing sensitivity is much greater than it ever was over the last 2 years. Markups are coming down, wage growth is moderating, and we also have an environment where, from a productivity standpoint, we have lower unit labor cost growth because of stronger productivity growth. So those are all very favorable drivers of disinflationary currents, which should continue in the coming months and allow the Fed to recalibrate monetary policy, especially given the weakening in labor demand that we're seeing.
Greg, what do you see across the EY landscape? I mean, you're coming from a different twisted place, which is a lot of business relationships at Ernst & Young. I'm sorry, Greg, I'm old school. I got to call it Ernst & Young, even though I know it's EY. But what are you observing within the customers, the clients, the people of EY?
I think we have a unique vantage point at EY in that we speak with a lot of CFOs, a lot of CEOs, and you get a pulse on the economy in real time across a wide array of sectors. And part of my view, macro view, is really informed by what I hear, my conversations with business leaders. And the disinflationary perspective that was against consensus for the last 6 months has really been fed by this perspective that, yes, businesses are still trying to pass on higher costs, but they're realizing that that's much more difficult. They're also realizing that wage pressures they are able to compress wage pressures and look for opportunities to reduce these cost pressures on the labor front by increasing productivity growth. So what we're seeing in the economy is actually potentially quite encouraging. We just have to be careful not to go too far beyond the edge, because what we're seeing right now is stronger productivity growth, driving stronger supply and allowing for non-inflationary growth. The longer monetary policy remains too restrictive, the greater the risk you go beyond that neutral point and you start to impose too much stress on the economy, which will hurt demand, but also hurt supply and could lead us into this downturn type of economy.
How about the consumer? How's the consumer faring out there from your perspective? And there's discussion, we've kind of got a bifurcated economy, bifurcated consumer. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to position it. I don't think there's the consumer in the US. The consumer doesn't really exist. We have multiple types of consumers, and the environment that we're in right now, where you have elevated costs, elevated interest rates, is gradually eating and forcing more and more consumers from the lower end of the income spectrum all the way to the median and perhaps slightly above to be much more careful with their outlays. And we're seeing that in a number of reports, whether you look at retail sales or you look at consumer spending trends, there are increased signs of more prudence on the part of different tranches of consumers. And you're also seeing that on the credit front. The latest credit data also points to more difficulties for younger generations, more debt-burdened generations that have more difficulties in financing their credit.
Greg, one final question. Is Atlanta GDP now of value to you? Is it an immediate snapshot of where we are? Or do you just assume 2.x% comes south here as we get to September 30th?
I think we're on a decelerating trend when it comes to GDP. We still had a fairly good reading in the second quarter. I look at the year over year, and I tend to look at other measures, GDI, gross domestic income, and the average of GDP and GDI, which is GDO, which tends to have a little bit more of a forward-looking perspective in terms of the trend. I don't think we're falling off a cliff by any means, but if you look at labor market dynamics and disposable income trends, which is currently running at about 1% on an inflation-adjusted basis, that portends to an environment where consumer spending will cool, and in turn that will lead to slower GDP growth. So GDP with a 1% handle wouldn't surprise me.
Greg, thank you so much. It's really, really smart. Greg Daco, and look for him out on LinkedIn. He's writing Daco. Excuse me. I forget it's my Rochester accent.
You can go either way.
I didn't speak English till I was 30 or 40. Greg, thank you. Greg Daco with EY. This morning. I can't say enough about his work on LinkedIn. It's really smart. It's a real value add. So's the market. Futures were up 50, Paul, up 60. Right now, SPX trading up 75 points.
Yep.
I have no idea I'm in triple leveraged all cash. I don't care.
Exactly. But again, given the sense of panic that there was in the early trading on Monday morning, this is some turnaround.
It's sort of like the boats left the dock.
Yeah.
Which is often what we have after the third martini at the Tucker House. The boat leaves the dock. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Tom, Kamala Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, hitting the campaign trail. They hit it in Philadelphia last night with the vice president going after her opponent's reputation.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Their running mate, Tim Walz, made his campaign trail debut, citing some of the areas where he feels Donald Trump falls short.
He froze in the face of the COVID crisis.
Well, the Harris campaign says it raised $20 million after she announced her running mate. And a new poll from NPR, PBS News, and Marist College has Harris leading Trump nationally, 51% to 48%. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri, a prominent member of the Progressive Squad, was defeated in her Democratic primary yesterday by local prosecutor Wesley Bell. Bush is the second member of the squad to lose a primary this cycle after Congresswoman Jamal Bowman was defeated in June. The NTSB holding an investigative hearing on the January 5th mid-air blowout aboard an Alaska Airlines flight. 20 hours of testimony continues as the NTSB sifts through evidence to answer any questions. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has this update from Washington.
7 months after an almost new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft lost that large fuselage panel during flight, safety investigators are conducting an extensive 2-day-long hearing to uncover any remaining mysteries surrounding that incident. Executives from Boeing and Spirit AeroSystems continue to face questions all day today from the NTSB. Yesterday, witnesses for Boeing and Spirit defended their company's safety systems and inspection practices. The NTSB says it has not yet determined who failed to securely fasten that panel. The hearings will last for a total of 20 hours, yesterday and today. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Israel's Olympic team says some athletes have received threats as they compete in Paris amid larger tensions over Palestinian deaths during the war in Gaza and the threat of a wider regional conflict in the Middle East. The president of the Israeli National Olympic Committee telling the AP team members had received centralized threats meant to generate psychological terror. Half a century ago, French high wire artists made Manhattan gasp.
I am holding the balancing pole in a South Tower ready to walk.
It was 50 years ago today. Philippe Petit ventured 1,300 feet atop the Twin Towers and took a stroll on a wire fastened between them this week in celebration of the anniversary. The 74-year-old would be performing at a church here in New York, crossing a wire only 20 feet above the ground. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Lisa, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Dow up 270 points, 1.3%, SPX 1.7% on the NASDAQ 100. The VIX hasn't moved yet, but that's like mathiness right now, 22.59. We'll see if we get to a 21 handle. Paul, I got a log chart of Standard & Poor's 500 in front of me, and it was well outside 2 standard deviation carnage on Monday. And we basically made it halfway back to one subjective moving average. I have. Where does fear of missing out? I don't even know what to say here.
It feels like it's still there. It feels like buy the dip is still there.
Unbelievable. The VIX of 60.
Yeah.
And we're buying the dip.
Exactly. I mean, just the risk appetite is still out there. And I think it's just the expectation that this Fed will be cutting rates, maybe later than we thought, but certainly going to be cutting.
Correlation. Dana Telsey.
Yep.
Ralph Lauren. And she says it was a solid quarter. This is like a solid 2024.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen some weakness with the consumer, but it's tough to call it here.
39,300 on the Dow. Wow. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen with the NASDAQ leading the charge, up more than 1.5%, 305 points, 16,673. The S&P 500 up 1.5%, 78 points, 5,317. And the Dow up 0.8%, 328 points, 39,326. The 2-year yield, 4.01%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.93%. And that's up 4 basis points. We have spot Spot gold higher, 2,399 an ounce. Brent crude, $77 a barrel. WTI crude, $74 a barrel. To earnings, Airbnb down 14%. That's its biggest drop since its 2020 trading debut. This was after its disappointing outlook. You have EV maker Rivian down nearly 6%. Second quarter revenue missed estimates. And where we are seeing a lift, well, that's Lumen Technologies. They're up 42%. The company says a surge in AI demand, well, that's leading to a surge in sales. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Winnie Cisar now, too short a visit with credit sites this morning. Winnie, Paul and I have been remiss. We have not talked about the spread market. We had spreads, the phrase folks from Boston is wicked tight, in that we had price up versus full faith and credit treasuries. How did spreads respond given the disaster Monday morning?
Spreads definitely responded in a pretty true risk-off scenario. We saw everything gapping wider with high yield bearing the brunt of the move, including triple Cs, which are now trading in aggregate in distressed territory, so wide of 1,000 basis points. But since then, we've seen a nice snap tighter, not to the same extent that we've seen in the equity market with the bounce higher on S&P 500, but definitely some spread stability from here.
Who is buying corporate paper?
Anyone who likes the all-in yield. I think that is the big story right now. Even with the move wider, spreads are still objectively tight. Just north of 100 basis points in investment grade, sub 400 basis points in the high yield market. But when you look at the yield dynamic, we are still above that kind of magical 5% number for U.S. investment grade yields. And people generally like to reinvest at levels when we're north of 5%.
Winnie, I'm looking at the IN Go function on the Bloomberg terminal, the Bloomberg Index browser. I see the best performance in fixed income this year is high yield in the U.S. market. Kind of surprising given some of the concerns about the economy out there. Talk to us about high yield.
Yeah, so high yield is an interesting dynamic because you are getting paid so much for the carry. You have elevated base rates, relatively short duration, so you benefit from that inverted to flat treasury yield curve, and then also materially wider spreads than you have up in quality in the investment grade world. You also have a very different high yield market than the one that we saw pre-GFC. It's higher rated, bigger capital structures, less LBO deals. So people are looking at higher quality high yield as a pretty attractive place to be. And then when you factor in just the carry, the ability to generate really strong returns when you're already yielding 7, 8, 9, 10%, that is definitely a pretty positive story for high yield.
Winnie, one more question. We've got to run here to the news of the moment, as it's been too often typical. On total return versus clipping the coupon, what do you see 1 year forward?
Yeah, so 1 year forward, I think that total returns still look pretty okay. We're not expecting a massive outperformance of coupon, but we do have a bias for treasury yields moving lower over the next 12 months and relative spread stability. And that factor gives you a little bit of a coupon plus scenario in both investment grade and high yield.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Cisar, Global Head of Strategy, Credit Sites, with us as well. He has been incommunicado. I haven't seen him in like 3 days because the big take is getting blown up on about a 6-hour basis. David Gura joins us now. I'm afraid to ask, what will you launch this morning?
We are focusing on, of course, what's happened here in the presidential race with Governor Walz being picked by Kamala Harris. So suffice to say, we'll tackle that, Tom. I know you're an avid listener. I won't let you down.
We're learning about this vice president nominee candidate, whatever he is, the governor of Minnesota. Do we understand the kind of progressive he is? How close is he linked to my Ute of Walter Mondale and farther back HHH?
I think very close, and I think that there's a heritage of Paul Wellstone as well. And I think what will be interesting over the course of this campaign is to see how he reclaims what that term means, the definition of what progressivism is. And I think it is very closely tied to the Democratic Party that you remember. You listen to him talk about what motivates him and animates him in politics, and Governor Walz talks a lot about just wanting to do good for the most people possible. So it's a big tent that he's trying to get people into, and has been.
The micro, which he knows cold, is south of Minneapolis. I'm going to say down to Mayo Clinic. Annie Craig is lean Democrat in the 2nd District of Minnesota. He's going to go in and save the day for her, I assume, and win. But he's got to do that in Michigan and Wisconsin. How does he affect Minnesota wins in these other states?
He knows agriculture. He knows the Midwest, born in a small town in Nebraska, moved to a small town in Minnesota. He speaks their language. There's a level of authenticity there that I think will appeal to people in other states in the Midwest. But something I'm struck by as I listen to him talk is the way that he thinks about and addresses people who might have voted for Donald Trump or might be leaning toward voting for Donald Trump again. He doesn't write them off. His whole critique is the Democratic Party's message is wrong and something isn't clicking. And I think that that's something that's going to be on full display over the course of the campaign. And I think what he's going to impress on now his running mate, Vice President Harris, and others, refining that message. Obviously, it's one of more optimism. That's the contrast that we're seeing with the Republican Party, trying to make that stick and trying to portray himself and the party as more pragmatic, I think, than the opponents.
I tell you what, I mean, David, I'd love to get your opinion here. It seems like it's been about as good as it can get for the Democratic ticket here over the last several weeks. The momentum, the honeymoon continues here. Is this a little bit surprising, or is, I
think what's most surprising to me is how this has been kind of a plug-and-play campaign. Kamala Harris has come into a very established campaign apparatus. Yes, she's brought in some of her own people. We've seen the hiring of folks who worked for the Obama campaign come in now, but it's moved really efficiently. There's been a lot of get up and go, and you mentioned that honeymoon period. I think that's what a lot of pollsters have cautioned about. We're in one. How long could it last? It's crazy. It's just been not even 3 weeks since all of this happened. But I think that we'll see what the longevity there is. But as you say, I think that it's gone incredibly well for Democrats, and they hope to sustain that momentum.
Does President Trump pounce now, or a la the old days of HHH and Mondale, does he courteously keep the ammo dry, the gunpowder dry, until after Chicago?
I think that he wants to pounce, and you've seen him doing that, and they've tried to attach all kinds of labels to Tim Walz, and we'll see what sticks. I mean, I think that what the Democrats must find delicious is looking at this guy who's wearing T-shirts and baseball caps being labeled radical and dangerous. I think that they must see kind of the visual irony of that. You mentioned the convention just a couple of weeks away. I think that's the moment where this kicks into gear in earnest. But we have this, these few days now where Kamala Harris and her running mate are going to be going to all of these swing states. Yes, where people in contention for the running mate job are from. We see J.D. Vance kind of hot on their heels as they're doing that. So they're not sitting idly by while this happens, but I think it will tick up after the convention.
When your people, when we talk to Gura's people, can you come back and talk about the transcendental culture of the Northwest, what was Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the heritage of this? Is fascinating. It's truly from my youth what we're seeing here with what's called the Progressive Democratic Party.
I would be glad to, and I think on Friday I'll be back.
Are you back on Friday?
I think Paul is out.
Yes.
I'm here.
Wait,
I'm playing the role of Paul.
Excuse me, Lisa, help me here. Is this like flood relief?
Oh yes, exactly.
Exactly. Get the Vespa to higher ground.
Up to the second floor as well. David Gura on tune and scheduled for Friday.
See you all.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Should we do a shout out to YouTube? I mean, it's just like you guys delivered it on Monday. It was shocking.
Yeah,
absolutely. To see, okay, we got to watch this. The market's blowing up.
Yep.
Do we watch the big take, or do we watch Bloomberg Surveillance? I mean, that was the question that had to be made. YouTube, thank you. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. That's the #1 way to help me with this project. For Steve Tyler up in Boston, for all of Aerosmith, they consider their future. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning. Dow up 366 points.